So once again, this training is extreme heat for construction and landscape professionals, and we are presenting this on behalf of SoCalGas. My name is Kaelyn, and if you have any questions regarding this training, you can reach out to me directly via this email address or the training at email address. This is our presenter, Robert Carr, and our other presenter, Solimar. So if you aren't familiar with USGBC California, our vision is to transform California into a more sustainable and resilient and equitable place for all. And we are proud to be serving in the 5th largest economy in the world, which is California. And this is a big location for lots of unique challenges, but we do work together with all of California as to create a unified collaborative approach in addressing climate change and disasters. If you'd like to learn more about our impact that we've made, you can download our impact report via this QR code. And if you'd like to get involved in other ways, you can become a member, join one of our committees, support one of our programs, be a mentor, volunteer, or build yourself with professional development, such as this one. So something that is big on a lot of Californians' minds right now is wildfire resources. So we do have this wildfire defense rebuilding support and recovery resources link here, which you can follow this QR code to access, or you can go to this website. And there you can also download our occupant health toolkit, which you can access through this QR code. We'd also like to invite you to visit our Career Center. You can scan this QR code to access green job postings, more professional development training, and our virtual job fairs as well. You can go to this website as well to get there. And you all registered through the Learning Center. So we are excited to have our content hosted through the Learning Center. And that is also where you'll be taking your exam. If you're interested in more of our training, then you can access it via this QR code to get to our Career Center. Our professionals directory is something that is a great opportunity for everyone to gain access to a professionals network and also be matched with potential project leaders in the future. So I do recommend that all of you join our professionals directory. You can reach that via this QR code. And these are the instructions for your quiz and certification, which will be sent out to you after. But you would access the Learning Center through the Career Center on our website, and you'll get 3 chances to take this exam. You'll have 2 weeks to take the exam, and it is open book. So this link, it will be posted in the chat as well to access to the Learning Center. And then I'm going to turn it over to our presenters, Robert Carr and Solimar. Like, go back here. Okay, thank you all.
Hello, everyone. My name is Robert Carr, and I'm happy to be co-presenting with you today for Extreme Heat. I'm a training and programs manager here at USGBC California. All right, so here we go. Share sound. All right. So I'm going to start at the table of contents, our agenda. And let me know, because can everyone see this? This is all good? Okay, if not, please let me know. So, what we're going to be talking about today is kind of like how the built environment, the buildings that and all the surrounding sites that they rest on and reside on, how they actually basically interact with climate change and how they're responsible for the climate change. Because there is a huge piece to that, and that's why making our buildings and our landscapes that are around them kind of more resilient and more adaptive, and kind of help actually kind of mitigate climate change, because there's a huge connect in there. And then we're going to be talking about kind of the folks that help build and maintain and work in these buildings under these extreme heat conditions. All right, because essentially, as we know, there's actually extreme heat warning out today. So we're gonna be talking about that, and then we're gonna go into kind of things we can do. Basically, designs for basically strategies for buildings to minimize heat gain in extreme heat events, how to make the buildings more energy efficient, and how by doing this, whether it's a new construction or retrofit, we can get these materials to be more sourced more sustainably, because that's again part of there's lots of embodied carbon in there. And then Solimar is really going to go into the environmental justice piece, and then go and really do a deep dive into the things we can do in the landscapes of these buildings and the built environment that can really kind of reduce basically heat gain, the urban heat island effect, and also kind of the water stress that the landscapes can have. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so extreme heat is one of the leading causes of natural death, weather-related death in the United States. And in California, I was reading an article, I believe it's the 5th most common cause of death in general, approaching in California. So the problem is that it really affects the most vulnerable among us, our seniors, children, those with pre-existing conditions. And as the extreme heat events become more common and more extreme, that's only going to get worse. And so we really need to start thinking about how we can basically help ourselves, because we live or work inside buildings 90% of the time. So we need to make sure that not only are these buildings safe for us to be in under these extreme heat conditions, but what can we do to kind of make these buildings, mitigate the different stresses on the people and then also the environment and infrastructure that we have. So real quick, kind of a refresher course on climate change. Essentially, due to basically kind of our industries and basically supporting our cultures, basically our civilization in general, that there's lots of greenhouse gas emissions, whether it's transportation, industry, just basically living, keeping ourselves and growing our food. So there's lots and lots of emissions, and unfortunately, a lot of those emissions are greenhouse gases, which are increasing the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And we'll kind of talk why, but that's the issue. And if you'll see here on this graph right here, the two main targets that we're going to be talking about today are the emissions coming from buildings. And then transportation as well, but we're really going to be concentrating on this thing, and buildings and landscapes actually are just such a big target. And there's so many things we can do to kind of reduce these emissions from buildings in the built environment. And again, basically the most common greenhouse gas is CO2, but there's many like methane, which are, basically maybe not as concentrated, but they're much more powerful of a greenhouse gas. And then there's other, nitrous oxides and fluorinated gases that are, generally just not good for your health as well. So sorry about this. All right. So the way, basically, the greenhouse gas effect, or the greenhouse effect, is actually something that we need to live. That's why we have, we've been able to live. We've got, plants can grow and all that sort of thing, is because it basically keeps our temperature of our Earth kind of right at the Goldilocks place. So what happens is the sun's rays hits the Earth. Some of it bounces back into space. But the ones that are absorbed get re-radiated as heat, and the atmosphere, greenhouse gases, have been basically doing this for ever since the beginning of our planet. Basically reabsorbs a portion of that, and then the rest is radiated in space. And so that reabsorbed basically heat is what keeps us warm. All right, without it, we'd be one big block of ice. All right. What's happening, though, is that we're increasing the concentration of the greenhouse gases, which results in we're actually absorbing more and more of that heat, or actually retaining more and more of that heat that would normally be vented into space, which basically kind of heats up the atmosphere, heats up the planet, and gives more energy for, basic extreme heat and other natural disasters that are happening. And unfortunately, we're continuing to increase the rate of emissions to date. So we really have to do a much better job of, basically plateauing these emissions and reducing them as quickly as we can. So the effects are clear. For those of us here in Southern California, you can't look back to December, when Los Angeles, in January, sorry, the Los Angeles fires, the Palisades and the Altadena fires, the Eaton fires, basically happened not in your normal fire season, and the results were devastating. Two major communities in the Los Angeles area were decimated. And again, the conditions were right. There was massive winds. Everything was very dry. We've had, such a long period of drought that the conditions were right for this. But if you look kind of beyond Southern California, we've got, extreme heat everywhere. We have fires throughout California. In Canada for right now, there's places are burning that never really burn. Hurricanes are, basically commonly becoming category 5s. There's lots and lots of tornadoes that have been happening and causing massive damage throughout the country. There's fires in, throughout the world in Turkey and Greece. And again, these natural disasters are occurring more commonly and more fiercely and kind of more intensely. And so that's because there's much more energy in our global system. So and so we're going to be concentrating on extreme heat, which is really kind of, again, it has kind of profound effects on all these other disasters as well. Also, there's a common misunderstanding between weather and climate. A lot of folks go, well, it's really a nice, calm day and it's beautiful, it's pleasant. We don't have climate change. But the thing is that weather is the everyday state of kind of, the local area. All right. And climate is the average pattern of weather over time. So, basically it can be raining, it can be cold, it can be super hot, it can be windy. That's the weather. And so a lot of people will confuse that there's, kind of like the everyday state of with actual weather, where, here in Southern California, we're becoming drier. We're not getting nearly as much rainfall, and we're getting more extreme heat events. And so that's the climate changing. So I'm going to go ahead and play this. This kind of, it talks about kind of how this, basically all the systems that are global systems, basically affect one another. So if you can't hear the sound, please let me know and I can restart it.
The Earth's climate system is driven by two things: the way energy from the sun moves in and out of the atmosphere, and the way heat moves around the atmosphere and the oceans. Energy from the sun is the main driver for our climate system. When the energy from the sun reaches the atmosphere, some is absorbed and some is reflected, mainly from clouds. Most of the remaining energy heats the Earth's surface, although again a tiny fraction is reflected. The Earth's surface then loses its heat again through rising air currents, radiation, and the evaporation of water. Some of this heat passes straight through the atmosphere and back to space, but some is absorbed by greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, water vapour, methane, and ozone. Most of the air, nitrogen and oxygen, doesn't do this. The atmosphere re-emits the absorbed heat. Some escapes to space, but some heats the Earth's surface again. Eventually, all the heat escapes into space, but not before the temperature of the Earth has been raised enough to allow us to survive. If the greenhouse gases didn't absorb and re-emit heat, we wouldn't be able to live on Earth. If nothing else happened in the Earth's climate system, weather and climate wouldn't change across the globe. However, the sun's energy is distributed unevenly across the globe. Because the Earth tilts, the sun's intensity changes at different latitudes and in different seasons. Generally, there is more heat near the equator than there is at the poles. In this example, the variation is shown during the northern hemisphere winter. To balance this inequality, the climate system moves heat from the equator to the poles through the atmosphere and the oceans. In the tropics, near the equator, thunderclouds develop, forcing warm air to rise and then drift towards the poles at high levels. Cooler air flows in the opposite direction at the Earth's surface, setting up cells. Similar cells develop in other areas as you move towards the poles. At the boundaries between these cells, air is either rising from the Earth's surface or falling down towards it. Where the air is rising, you will get low pressure, often with rain or snow. Where it's coming down, you will get high pressure and fine weather. That's how heat is moved around the atmosphere. Now let's see how it moves around the oceans. Changes in sea temperatures and saltiness create ocean currents. For example, the Gulf Stream is one of the strongest currents in the world. Surface water in the North Atlantic is cooled by winds from the Arctic. Cold, dense, salty water sinks and travels towards the equator deep in the ocean. In turn, the Gulf Stream moves warm water from the Gulf of Mexico northeastwards at the surface to replace it. This brings warmth to northwest Europe, making the climate milder than any other place at the same latitude. It is these interactions between the sun's energy and how the atmosphere and the oceans move heat around the Earth which produce different climates in different parts of the world and set up variations in our day-to-day weather. A warming world caused by increases in greenhouse gases could upset the delicate balance of our climate system and have an impact on our longer-term climate.
Okay, so I think that did a good job of kind of summarizing what I was saying before, and you can kind of see how global weather patterns and climate and just basically are so connected. So if we basically start to shift things like the Gulf Stream and kind of change that, that could change weather dramatically from Florida to England. All right, and so and this is all happening now. Back to extreme heat. One of the things that we're need to kind of concentrate on is that most people live in urban environments. And we have something called the urban heat island effect, which basically amplifies the extreme heat events. And the reason being is that there's lots of hardscape in the urban environment. There's lots of cars and motors and engines giving off heat, air conditioners giving off heat. There's less basically shade structures. There's less kind of basically landscape and trees and things that basically help cool areas like they are in rural areas. And so the urban heat island effect essentially is stating that that basically urban areas will be hotter than rural areas under given conditions. So under an extreme heat event, it's going to be a lot hotter by factor of 5 degrees maybe in the kind of central urban environments rather than rural environments, just because there's a lot more kind of vegetation, trees, and so forth that kind of help kind of either just provide shade or just general coolness. So that's something we need to think about, because a lot of us here in Southern California live in urban environments. Also, in big cities, what happens is that these structures also can change wind patterns. They can basically change the direction of wind, change the quality of wind, the airspeed and direction. So again, that can make kind of the urban heat island effect even worse. So if you naturally have kind of cooling breezes off, say, water, whether it's the bay or the ocean, and you've got all these buildings, that cooling breeze may not actually make it up to everyone or every space in the city. And also, there's just lots of cars, lots of just things that radiate heat in general. And then if you look at the tarmac and sidewalks and the hardscapes, they tend to re-radiate that heat much higher, much more than, say, grass or trees or what have you. So again, this is kind of, again, just adding to the total urban heat island effect. And then we're going to be talking about kind of how we can do things to reduce this quite a bit. Also, we need to consider the strain on the grid. Again, our infrastructure, our grid is, pretty old. It's 70% of it's over 25 years old. And during extreme heat events, we're going to basically put more stress on the grid. And which could be a problem, because if the grid fails, or they have brownouts and rolling blackouts and so forth during an extreme heat event, you're going to basically not be able to cool yourself and make kind of the people who are most vulnerable even more vulnerable. So again, we need to think about not only basic ways to reduce heat gain and to basically reduce cooling loads and kind of the best ways to keep cool and so forth in extreme heat events, but how do we do it in such a way that we're not putting additional strain onto the grid. Now, luckily here in California, we're doing a lot of things to do that, and we'll talk about those. Thankfully, because we're relying heavily on renewables and battery power and stuff like that. So Now, in the past, when we started kind of introducing renewables on the grid, there is something called the duck curve, where during the day, all solar panels generally overproduce, which basically gets put back on the grid, and they're generally was sent to other places outside California. Now, and without battery power, what would happen is that you'd have this huge generation gap of electricity, where now renewables are not producing at night. Then you have to kind of go and use fossil fuel plants, and so that was a problem. But as we build more and more batteries into the grid, and basically kind of integrate them into the grid, we're talking utility scale storage, battery storage, that duck curve really starts to kind of go away. And so when we overproduce energy during the day, whether it's wind, geothermal, or solar, the batteries are charging right now, and able to discharge that energy at night, so that again, those renewables can be used when we need them, and really kind of basically making the grid a lot more stable as we start to integrate more and more renewables on the grid. So the goal for California is to be carbon free for our electricity generation. And so imagine a world where all our buildings are electrified, using minimal amount of methane gas for heating and space heating and cooking and water heating. And they're basically all those electric buildings are being basically electrified with carbon free energy. You theoretically can be carbon neutral, in our society, which would be fantastic. So that is the goal. It's going to be a challenge. We have to, again, more energy grid, more batteries need to put on the grid. Electrifying our homes will, especially the existing buildings, will be a challenge, and there's some capital in there. If we start making the buildings from now on all electric, then we're going to basically go a long way. So that's kind of where the energy codes are taking us, is to basically transition to heat pumps for space heating and water heating, basically induction for cooking. So there's for everything we do, there's an electric equivalent, and then if we can power those homes and buildings with carbon-free electricity, we're definitely going towards massively reducing our carbon emissions. Again, gas consumption, there's lots of jobs involved with this. We're going to have to retrofit all of them, because most buildings here today have already been built. And then it'll also help save health costs. I mean, again, the unhealthy air due to all the combustion we do for transportation and space heating, what have you, electricity, is not good for our well-being. So that'll help as well. All right. Now, again, excessive heat puts our health under strain. Again, heat stroke is a big one. It's the most obvious one, but that can lead to cardiac and kidney diseases by extreme heat events, respiratory issues, because again, pollutants, basically can become worse under extreme heat days. So again, not only are you hot, but you're also breathing in unhealthy air. Unfortunately, a lot of those conditions are happening kind of inland, where we're basically underserved and disadvantaged communities are basically are at. And so basically those folks on the coast that are more affluent are getting cooler breezes, they're getting less pollution. And so again, not everyone feels this extreme heat as bad as others. So what can we do to prepare? Understand kind of what resources are available to you. So for the LA area, if you go heat relief for LA, if you go to the website, they have all the different cool zones. You put in your zip code. They have basically where you can go to kind of like libraries and such, malls, where you can go and stay in cool areas for free. Also kind of, things you can do personally is stay hydrated. Basically, if you're pregnant or kind of vulnerable, make sure that you're in where those cooling areas are, and also kind of have a, kind of a buddy system where you're checking in on folks that you may think may be elderly or maybe need this to make sure that they're okay under extreme heat days. So there's lots and lots of resources for you in the LA area for sure. And unfortunately, basically inland areas, especially, underserved communities, there's less, vegetation, there's less trees, there's less kind of this foliage, what have you. And so that urban heat-line effect is just even more. And unfortunately, there's this, when on these extreme heat events there, and then also these communities may not necessarily have the same amount of cooling available. So there's many homes that don't have air conditioning, or if they do have air conditioning, it doesn't work very well, or it doesn't work at all. And again, the cost burden is not equal as well. So again, try to find, basically if there is, is shade, try to find it if you have to be outside and so forth. Again, we're going to talk more about this. Solimar to talk more about this as well, as far as the environmental justice piece of extreme heat. But again, basically it's hottest inland. And that's where a lot of our underserved communities, our communities of concern, are all located, unfortunately. So again, the most affluent people are generally on the coast or in the mountains, in cooler areas, and those of us that where the heat or urban heat on event really is taking effect. And unfortunately, their energy bills. So if you do have air conditioning in these areas, they're going to have to spend more money just because they have to they have more heating or cooling loads. Their air conditioners may not be as efficient or may not be able to maintain them as well if they have it at all. So again, it's just and then a lack of trees, a lack of shade, this exacerbates this problem. So I'm going to hand it over to Solimar to kind of take it from here.
Hi, everyone. Can I be heard?
Yes.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. Well, first, I'm just going to do a brief introduction on myself. My name is Solimar Gutierrez. I am a training partner with the USGBC, and I'm delivering trainings in Spanish and in English. So, yeah, I'm just excited to be here with y'all and making sure that we're all learning something. So jumping into the environmental justice, like what Robert was sharing regarding the disparities in cooling and in income, that impacts our lives a lot. That impacts where we can afford to live, and where we afford to live greatly impacts our overall health and our life expectancy. Up to 10 years of variance in life expectancy can exist depending on your zip code. And when you look at maps on an aerial view, you can actually see the differences in green space available or quality of the structures that people are living with as well. Just by looking at a map, it's pretty clear to see. And therefore, health outcomes, including the quality of our air health, the quality of our food availability, green space, medical care, and proximity to freeways, all of this can impact up to 60% of our health outcomes, where in vulnerable communities, there's higher exposure to air pollution, toxins, or sometimes those neighborhoods are even the dump sites for that, therefore making those levels even higher. And due to affordability, the accessibility to food that is healthy and culturally relevant is also very low. So let's move on to how we can combat these types of injustices. It really does come down to planning, like public planning that is community centered, and that prevents gentrification. Gentrification is primarily a economic function and not a social one, although the impacts are social. But when we are designing and redesigning our communities, these communities that are underserved, because we feel the effects of extreme heat and climate change first and more dramatically, need to be impacted positively to balance that out. So that includes cool roofs and green roofs, cool pavement, making sure that there's more trees and native plants around, as well as incorporating more of a bio landscape, such as putting in some swales or rain collection garden. Also, we can definitely work in the public spaces that are already existing, including our parks, our rooftop gardens, and different corridors that exist throughout the cities where we can put in cooling components. Similarly, we should be aiming to add like more shaded areas in between and throughout like the tops of buildings to protect us walking around, the animals, lowering that temperature, but also being able to provide protection against the heat gain that comes from cars and other vehicles and installations that are in our day-to-day. The USGBC of California actually participates in different types of advocacy regarding environmental justice and in the built environment, like what we're discussing. And greatly that has to do with green workforce development. And so these are different bills that you can see on the slides that talk about or touch on different of these topics, such as like green workforce development, environmental rights, climate pollution reduction, and homes initiatives as well. And these work as like local service provisions for financial assistance and just for the communities to balance out some of those injustices and inequities and lack of resources, making sure that it is combated through policy so that it's more long-term of a change. How can we reimagine the way that we design our cities and communities to be more climate resilient? This is the large question that we're going to be discussing today. We do have the knowledge, we do have the skills to build climate resilient communities, but now our changing needs to think, or our thinking needs to change so that it can become an industry standard and not something that is still having to be spearheaded in 2025. Why? Because thinking green is our future. And because we are in already the effects of climate change, that does require us to mitigate and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and climate impact, as well as adapt to life in this changing climate. And knowing that, how we used to live is not how we live now, and definitely not how we'll be able to live in the future. So we do need to adapt to that. Changing the way that we imagine the design of our built environment and how we interact with it is how we adapt to these new climate conditions. Climate change is going to make weather more difficult to predict, and it's already proving, to be very difficult. And so we need to be able to think further than even the prediction models that we have. How we design our cities directly impacts our health and our life expectancy. Our environments impact our cortisol levels. So what we see, what we hear and smell every day can impact how our long-term and health and vulnerability to chronic illness is impacted. We've evolved over thousands of years exposed to nature, but changes in technology and the way we design cities has changed so much about that, especially since industrialization and the reliance on fossil fuels. Changing design from focusing on specifically fossil fuels and industrialization and changing to being something that relies more on the natural environment and natural cooling, natural shading is like a huge shift in design that is going to have a huge impact as well. These types of designs can reduce stress and improve our health paradigm, which overall is a net gain, for society, because we are healthier people, we're more creative, we're more productive, and therefore we are able to depend less on systems of care that are to heal us after we're sick, and instead be focused on systems of care that are much more preventative. When we talk about worker health and job safety, it's essential that we discuss how we provide safe and equitable working conditions for our essential workers that are facing extreme heat conditions. In this section, we're going to talk about workers' rights a little bit more, how to recognize symptoms of extreme heat illness, and what measures can be taken to prevent severe health effects from taking place, and also just calm those symptoms, and try to get you back to a hydrated, cooled state. Heat is known to lead to illness, from headaches to cramps and exhaustion up to fatal heat stroke. And that often amplifies whatever health conditions are already existing, which can be cardiovascular, respiratory, renal, and diabetes related. High temperatures also are documented to affect cognition, which increases the risk of accidents as well. Heat exposure can lead to various chronic health effects, including chronic kidney disease and non-traditional origin fatal chronic kidney disease, which is a form of cirrhosis that is not brought on by alcohol, like what we commonly know to be liver cirrhosis, but instead by the long-term effects of working in extreme heat. There's actually multiple studies that show the dangers of extreme heat, and also how easy it can be to start feeling the long-term effects of working in extreme heat as a construction worker or landscaping professional as well, or any of the two. From a study that was in collaboration from the University of Mexico, Indiana University, and La Isla Network, in Kansas City, at a large data center project, the workers were observed to see what was the effect of heat on their health. And the study already showed very actionable results, like places where we can take action and grow from, because the findings revealed that 43% of the workers were experiencing a peak core temperature that was above 100 degrees, with 4% exceeding 101.3 degrees. even in the conditions that were cooler than typical summer conditions. Therefore, not working in the peak season, yet still reaching high temperatures. They learned, or the researchers learned, that most workers arrive dehydrated to the job site, and because of that, they were able to, implement programming that's going to make sure that workers are conscious of their hydration, not just at the work site, but before they come to work and after as well. Work sites should supply symptoms and worker health checklists in English and Spanish with pictures for recognizing the symptoms of dehydration and heat illness. By the time you're passing out, throwing up, you've already reached a level of heat exhaustion and possible heat stroke. When that severe dehydration is reached, water alone is not enough to help you or to revive you. You need electrolytes like fruits, sugar, and salt that can help your body absorb and rehydrate more quickly. So ask yourself these questions. What is the emergency response standard for your job site? Is it accessible for EMT? And if not, who's going to be trained on site to provide care? As well as these other questions that are on the slides regarding, like, do we even have a symptoms checklist, a worker health checklist at my job site? Does my employer provide food or drinks that have electrolytes and that are rehydrating? Do I have a medical condition or medication that I take, and therefore do I have a medical card or like a dog tag to help people, attend to me if need be? All of these are things to really consider and to try to implement if you are in the position to, because they are life-saving. Another thing would be, lightweight UV protected gear, super important. A lot of this clothes, it has, again, UV protection, so like 50 and plus UV protection, which is really, really critical for people who are outdoors long-term, both in hours of the day and in years of their life. Let's talk about some heat stroke symptoms, because heat stroke is entirely preventable if action is taken quickly and prevention especially is implemented. Heat illness looks more like being fatigued, sweating, cramping in the legs, arms, and shoulders. This is when you should move to a shaded area, drink water, and if you have an electrolyte drink already on hand, that's a good prevention. Heat exhaustion, however, the symptoms start to pretty much get worse. You'll start getting muscle aches and cramps. You could have headaches, excessive sweating and thirst, right? Your body trying to cool you off, feeling lightheaded or dizzy, having nausea, even vomiting, and having pale, cool, and clammy skin, especially on your limbs. This is important to note because if you're in extreme heat, your body is actually really hot, yet you feel like your skin is cold, right? And so this is like a reverse effect within your body of like your body is trying to cool you and make you feel cool, but you're still in a level of heat that is unhealthy for you. And this is when you should go lay down, like stop working. This is not a time to keep working and exerting your body. Cool down, apply wet cool cloths on your body, raise your legs, to make sure that like your blood pressure, your blood circulation is leveling out. Otherwise, these symptoms are continuing to get worse. Now that we've reached heat stroke, which is the next symptoms that I'm going to describe, your body is at 103 degrees Fahrenheit and your vital systems are totally starting to break down. The major symptoms of heat stroke include collapse, disorientation, slurred speech, vomiting, but also, vomiting. And if treated quickly, though, heat stroke fatalities are entirely preventable. So in a situation like this where you're in heat stroke, a cold water immersion may be a better option for you than simply laying down, applying cool cloths to your body or drinking water, right? We're beyond that point. Your body needs to be like forcefully cooled. So yeah, an ice bath is a great method for that. Now, when we look at our rights and protections to prevent this, right, so that this is not something that's normalized in our workplace, we have to look at the laws. Luckily, California is one of the 5 states with regulations and standards against extreme heat working conditions. The others are Colorado, Minnesota, Oregon, and Washington. So that's good because California and the other states are setting a standard that is above the federal one, especially in this time, right? Setting a higher standard is going to mean higher levels of protection for workers because, yeah, OSHA does have a protection for workers' rights to refuse unsafe conditions. But if we set that standard higher, then it just means that the base level conditions that we're working in are a lot higher. In the meantime, I recommend you guys to go visit CalOSHA's website. There will be links in the chat for that. And you can see the full text on the California heat standard because California's heat illness prevention standard does require that employees need to provide training, water, shade, and planning to their employees. And a temperature of 80 degrees triggers those requirements, which we know is like, it's not that hard to reach 80 degrees out here. Now, best practices for extreme heat on the job. Like I was mentioning before, that employers have to provide trainings, shade, water, and planning. This is the types of plans that they should have in place. There should be programs for rest, shade, water, and sanitation, as well as health assessments that measure how effective these improvements are in the workplace and also aid in the early detection of kidney injury or illness. Thirdly, education and training for workers and supervisors on the importance of heat stress prevention measures, such as this training. And finally, the development of an instrument or system to monitor the implementation of the workplace improvements is a way to be more scientific, right? With like, how well does those minutes of rest, that shade, that amount of water, and the sanitation stations, how effective and how measured can that effectiveness be? So these are like important things that do take a planning, but it's well worth it for the safety and the longevity of all of your workers. Now, when we talk about best practices for extreme heat at home, this means that we need to take extra self-care measures off the clock to make sure that our bodies are rested enough, cooled enough, and ready for the next day of work. Working in all day extreme heat, it means that we're coming off the clock really hot, really sweaty, really tired, really hungry. So taking a cold shower when you're home instead of a hot one is obviously going to cool your body. Reducing your metabolic heart rate. So right after work is not the best time to go on a run. It's not the best time to go work out and lift heavy. It's a time to be staying hydrated and well rested at home. Cooling, having a fan on, avoiding drinking caffeine during the day, which can be really hard to do, right? But transitioning from caffeinated drinks to other drinks, as well as incorporating foods in your diet that are more nutritious and more energizing. That way you have to rely less on caffeine as well and keeping you more hydrated. Electrolytes as well that can be found not just in electrolyte drinks, which are more artificial, but as well as in food like cucumbers and watermelon is a really easy way to make sure that you're not just hydrating yourself one way. Yeah, I think that's it for this section. So if anybody has any questions, we can leave those in the chat.
Okay, like Solimar said, a good way to kind of get us to ask questions is put those questions in the chat. We will be monitoring those. We're happy to pause and kind of answer any questions you have. So I'm going to be kind of talking about from this point forward, and then Solimar will kind of finish it up, is kind of basically what we can do with the built environment, the buildings themselves through design measures and kind of strategies and so forth. That we can basically reduce heat gain, make it easier to cool our spaces, and kind of also and then Solimar will go and just really kind of take a deep dive on what we can do with our landscapes. Because as you could see, when we have parks and shade and shrubbery and trees, those areas are much more cooler, they're much more healthy, and so to be in. So that's very, very important. And also, we will give you a break about at 11:30, so that's an hour and a half in. This course generally is about 3 hours long, so we'll have a 5 to 10 minute break there, so we can kind of get our drink or some food or what have you. So this particular one is geared towards basically contractors and builders who make decisions on retrofits and buildings as well, architects and so forth. But it is just as valuable to folks that are homeowners, because ultimately, we're trying to get contractors to kind of give folks basically ideas and strategies on what kind of materials to use, what kind of designs to incorporate. But as homeowners and people yourself, you can you can advocate for these things as well. So it works for every side of the coin, so to speak. So we're going to talk about, basically how do we make a building high performance. We're going to look at the building envelope, which is key for reducing heat gain in buildings. How we can basically cool our spaces and power our spaces efficiently, so we're not basically putting stress on the grid and making it maybe easier to fail. Talk about emergency situations, and then talk about strategies that don't require energy, like passive cooling strategies, green roofs, and the like. So, and then again, a lot of what we're talking about is going to require retrofits and basically new construction. How do we basically choose materials and do all these things we need sustainably? And then we'll talk about kind of, again, the other side of this coin, basically homeowner education, where homeowners can advocate for what they want in their buildings. So strategy for reducing heat gain and minimizing heat gain is kind of one of the key things. And so one of the easiest ways for light or heat to come into our spaces, our buildings, is through windows. We call that glazing. And so ultimately, when you're designing a new construction, you maybe can orientate the building so that the windows are not directly east or west facing. That again, that you're choosing windows that basically reduce the low E windows. So there's film on those windows that basically basically let in kind of natural light that basically don't, and then rejecting the wavelengths of light like infrared that we cannot see away from the space. And so again, we can do that. Again, also choosing to have shade structures either on the exterior part of the windows or interior part of the windows. So if you have like pergolas and basically kind of any structures that prevents light coming directly to the window, that's probably the best policy, the best strategy, because ultimately, if you have curtains or shades, those wavelengths are being reflected, but they've also entered into your space, and so there is some heat generated that, even though the light is not coming directly into the space after that. So having some way to shade the windows on exterior ways is really good. Some people think, again, so a couple times we're going to be talking about kind of trees and using shrubbery as shade for the exterior. We're only talking about kind of in the urban environment. We wouldn't be talking about this in the rural environment because, again, that puts some fire safety at risk. So, but in urban environments, that fire risk is much lower. And you can still actually do that strategy if properly done with fire strategy, and still provide some shade for those buildings. Again, when you're choosing windows, all the windows have ratings to them that basically kind of tell you how efficiently they basically can keep the cool space. Again, they have the solar heat gain coefficient, air leakage, which is a big one. Again, you want to make sure that the building envelope is as tight as possible. We'll talk more about what that means, but basically, if you're spending a lot of energy cooling your space, but that hot air is coming in because there's a lot of leakage in the windows and the frames, then you're going to be spending a lot more energy trying to keep that space cool. Again, visible transmittance, again, solar light to solar gain and so forth. All these things have, when you go and buy windows, have these ratings. And again, you want to choose ones that are, basically that reduce heat gain the most. U factor being one of them. So again, just be mindful that when you're buying windows, to look for these ratings so that you can choose the most efficient window that basically reduces the heat gain the most. When we're talking about roofs, again, heat gain is, comes through roofs quite a bit because, again, they're constantly being hit with sunlight. And what you're looking for is materials that you can, that basically reflect sunlight. All right. So for factories that you might see, or kind of flat roofs, you have this kind of TPO, which is kind of this rubberized membrane that's white. And again, anything that's really light will reflect light and kind of, and so they have ultimately they have ratings that are solar reflectance and thermal emittance. And those two factors are kind of put together to basically create the solar reflective index. And so every material you can put on your roof will have some sort of solar reflective index, and the higher, the better. And again, the whole idea is to reduce heat gain, basically reflect that light back into the atmosphere before it actually kind of gets absorbed into the building itself. So when you're looking for materials with a high SRI, again, 100 is the highest, 0 is the lowest. Again, You want something that's basically 90 or above is your kind of ideal situation. So again, all these building, like, so if you're choosing kind of roof tiles or you're choosing TPO or what have you, all these materials will have a SRI rating. So again, be mindful of that and just look for it. So there's various factors, so basically a lot of people think that, boy, if it's dark, then it's going to have a poor SRI, or if it's light, it might have a higher SRI. So kind of case in point, these asphalt singles, which are gray but lighter than the brown here on the right, it's metal material, and then the clay roof tiles, they tend to have really poor SRI from 14 to 34, which is not good. And then you can have, basically metal, basically sheet metal to covering your roof. It can have SRIs as high as 90. So it doesn't necessarily mean the color will define the SRI. In general, yes, darker materials will tend to have a lower SRI, but they can be manufactured with pigments in them that reflect light. And same with, tile and concrete. You can, especially concrete that can be really light. You can have an SRI as high as 91, but as low as 4. So again, be mindful of these ratings when choosing which materials to use for roofing. Also, attics and roofs can contribute to the, basically how, basically efficient the building is to basically maintain kind of the temperature in the building. Again, you want to make sure that you have high levels of insulation, but also it's not blocking any sort of ventilation system to basically, basically reject the hot air of the building. So a lot of homes and buildings will actually have kind of baffles and ways for, because as hot air rises, if it doesn't have a way to get out of the building, it'll kind of trap itself. And so again, you want to make sure that not only is that the roof highly insulated, but you also have, it's not blocking these roots for the air to leave the building. And again, that's all by design. And again, we use reflective surfaces to reduce heat. So we just talked about that. Let's see here. So subterranean foundations, again, it's may not be obvious, but any way air can kind of get in and out of the building is going to basically make it difficult, or more difficult, for you to cool or heat your space. So you want to minimize kind of those situations. So again, if you have any kind of, whether it's a pipe penetration or conduit, what have you, just make sure that all those are sealed, so that you're really minimizing the way that that air can get in and out of your spaces. Our folks are seeing my Zoom controls? I can't seem to minimize them, but if you're seeing them, sorry about that. Also, what we want to do is we also can, not only can we have our roofs have reflective materials and reflective strategies, we can also do that for our walls, right? Because obviously we're going to have sunlight hitting our walls. So again, with walls, just like your attics, you want to have them well insulated, and you also want to choose exterior finishes. All right, okay, thank you. We also want to make sure that we're coating those walls with materials that reflect light and reduce heat gain. Again, you want to minimize unshaded east-west facing wall area. Again, how do we provide shade to those walls? Again, depending on where you're at and kind of your fire risk, you can do that with trees and vegetation. If not, other kind of maybe more kind of just having pergolas or actually kind of overhangs that basically provide that shade was maybe more appropriate. But essentially, any ways you can, surfaces that are getting direct sunlight, try to find ways to provide this kind of, mechanical shade to that. I mean, the structural shade for that as well is pretty big. And again, you really want to have your wall installations there so that basically you don't have, basically heat kind of penetrating the building. That's what the insulation is for, is to prevent that. And again, when you're choosing insulation, again, we're going to go and start, talking more and more about choosing the sustainable materials when we go and do this. Again, when we choose, do we have to choose fiberglass and other kind of more toxic, harmful materials for insulation? No, there's cellulose insulation that basically is kind of fairly renewable. You can use post-consumer content related like denim. There's also kind of hemp, polyester oscillation. So there's many different products that basically have the same kind of strength and same kind of insulation properties as fiberglass, but they're much more sustainable. They're much more less toxic. They're better for the environment. So again, just be mindful that you just don't have to do the knee-jerk reaction of going and getting the most obvious materials that we've been using for decades, because that's what we do. Now there's many more possibilities and options there for you. And even if you're, obviously some people feel that there's a price component to that. Is there a return on investment on that? And a lot of these materials are, basically essentially the same cost as any other alternative. So be mindful of that as well. Again, if you're choosing insulation, you want to choose the one that has the highest R value. Higher is better. Again, you don't want to choose insulation that has VOCs or volatile organic compounds, that off gas that basically harm the occupants inside. Choose some that have recycled content, like recycled denim, and then also ones that have low embodied carbon. Okay, there's a lot of things that we call about embodied carbon. It's basically the carbon that was emitted to basically manufacture and transport and install the product inside the building. So locally sourced materials, more basically renewable materials, reducing any portion of that embodied carbon will go a long way. And also thinking about end of life, the life cycle part of the building again. So when the building finally has to be torn down and rebuilt, can the materials that are basically in it be reused or recycled and what have you? So again, you really want to be mindful of that. So now we're getting to the surfaces of the building. Again, just like the reflective roofs, you can have reflective walls. Again, paints are very much key to that. The way paints work and anything with color is that, so say for instance, you have a blue wall. What's really happening is that the paint is absorbing every color but blue in the visible spectrum and bouncing that blue back to you. So you're seeing that. So they have pigments in the paint that basically where we choose which wavelengths of light get reflected and which ones get absorbed. And then we also can do that for infrared, heat as well. So they can have pigments that basically are designed to reject those infrared wavelengths, which carry the heat away from the building. So again, that's just something that can be, basically manufactured and designed inside those paints. And then also spec'd when, basically building the building. Now, the thing about buildings themselves, they get painted all the time. Basically, they don't last forever. So whenever the building needs to be repainted, definitely be mindful of saying, do we have pigments in there? Are we choosing paints that are basically designed for this basically thermal radiation rejection? Right. There's other ways of doing reflective wall surfaces. So again, on the left here, we have a picture. We've got white walls. Again, that's the most obvious way to choose a color that bounces off light. But you also can choose kind of like windows and mirrored kind of metal reflection as well. So it acts like a mirror, which is bouncing the light off as well. So, and again, it's it's pleasant to the eye. There's kind of some architectural kind of beauty there as well. So again, you're not just stuck to one strategy or another. Just basically just whatever you're choosing, just you want to maximize the reflectance of those surfaces. Again, the more light that basically gets reflected away from the building, the lower the cooling loads. Again, it's the lower the heat gain. So you're spending less energy cooling the the space. You don't have to fight the kind of infiltration of heat as much. So it goes a long way to basically reducing your cooling loads. So now we're going to kind of switch to energy efficiency because again, on really extreme heat days, we're going to be using a lot more energy than we normally would. When you start turning on your HVAC, that your loads go way up. And again, so just on this kind of like the kind of the micro level of the home or the building itself, we want to reduce kind of the energy costs that we have. So if we have basically a really tight envelope with highly energy efficient systems, not only are we going to reduce our energy costs and make it basically easier to cool our spaces, our contribution to the stress on the grid will also be lower. So it's a win-win for everybody. So we're going to be concentrating on three main kind of systems and buildings that use the most energy. Again, so we're talking about HVAC, which is heating, ventilation, air conditioning. That is the biggest energy hog of buildings, especially on extreme heat days. Domestic hot water heating, again, that's probably number 2, and then kind of plug loads or appliances that are inside the building can, essentially be, just the way we choose which ones we have and how to use them can go a long way to reduce our, or to increase the efficiency of the building. So HVAC systems can contribute up to 40% of a building's energy consumption. So there's lots of ways we can reduce that that percentage. First of all, what we call right-sizing HVAC systems. So essentially, if you have a really tight envelope, you don't need the larger system that may have been spec'd before that. Because a lot of times what people do is they kind of just choose a system that's bigger than it needs to be, so that they can guarantee that they're going to get the required cooling. But a lot of times it's just kind of like putting it into a V8 into a Toyota Corolla, right? Do we really need that massive engine? No, we don't. So if you have a nice tight building envelope, you can reduce the size of the air conditioning system that will properly cool the space, which again makes it more efficient. You want also switching to heat pump systems. Again, they're much more efficient than your traditional, basically 2-system HVAC. So usually what happens is you have an air conditioner, and then in the wintertime, you've got a furnace that provides the hot air. So again, it's actually 2 systems in one. Heat pumps can both heat and cool spaces depending on the mode it's in. They have a cooling mode and a heating mode, and all you're really doing is reversing the flow of the refrigerant. So when you're cooling a space, the refrigerant basically absorbs the heat in the actual space and rejects it outside. And the heating mode, it'll actually absorb energy in the air, even though that air is cold. There is lots of energy in it, and then it'll basically dump that heat into the space. And so it's just a question of which direction the refrigerant is flowing. Also making sure that all ducting is sealed, because a lot of times you have your HVAC systems or your cooling zone. So you have a rooftop unit, let's say, and that air is being basically moved to different spaces to be cooled. And if those vents and ducting are basically not sealed or leaky, not all that air is going to get to the space, which is going to make the air conditioning system work a lot harder. So even though that system might be working perfectly, all that cooling may be kind of being lost to basically unoccupied spaces. And again, perform regular maintenance. It's just like a car. If you don't tune it up, you don't do the oil changes, eventually that car will be run more and more less and less efficient, and eventually fail a lot sooner than it should. So again, there's a return on investment there. Domestic hot water heating, again, heat pumps. Again, we're trying to basically decarbonize our buildings, which means electrifying them. So heat pumps are a way of electrifying basically our heating and cooling loads. And then for domestic hot water heating, we have heat pump water heaters, which basically work the same way. They just take the heat in the air and they transfer it to the water in the tank. The really cool thing about heat pump water heaters, well, there's many cool things. One is that they're 3 times more efficient than the most efficient gas water heaters. And the reason being is that heat pumps don't need to create the heat, then transfer it to the water. They just take heat that already exists in the air and transfer it. So you're not having to combust anything. And the really great thing about it is one of the kind of the side effects of it, or kind of one of the resultants of it, is that the air that's leaving the water tank is actually cooler. So it's like free cooling. So if you have a way to duct that cooler air from the heat pump water heater into a space, you're actually getting free cooling. So that's kind of a win-win-win there. Also, do we need to be heating our water to the max? Like, so for instance, can you have your water temperatures at 120 degrees, especially in the summertime? We don't need that coming out at 140. Do we need to have the hot water coming out at the max temp all the time? Because if people are not showering during the middle of the day, do we need to kind of have it going? And again, the heat pumps are more efficient, but they also give free cooling. So definitely be considering that. There's more and more heat pump options for also space and heat cooling, but also water, domestic hot water as well. And then every kind of range. So to massive boilers can be heat pumps. Your big hydronic systems for space heating and space cooling are also can have heat pumps as well. So there's a heat pump for every situation. Lighting, again, I think most people kind of understand this and have already kind of done LED retrofits. There are some spaces where they still have maybe some T8 linear fluorescent tubes. Again, for every type of bulb, whether it was incandescent or CFL, there is an LED equivalent. And the reason why it should be done is that it just is a great return on investment. So if you ever kind of still see kind of these incandescent bulbs, essentially they're just there's a filament, it glows, it gives off heat, gives off light, but also a ton of heat as well. They generally run at 60 watts. The LED equivalent that gives off the same kind of light, the same kind of, the color rendering index is 7 watts. All right. So you're saving 53 watts of energy whenever it's on. All right. So that's massive. And if you basically kind of times that times every light bulb in a big building or what have you, the energy savings is fast and the return on investment is quick. And then if you combine those with sensors, so daylighting sensors, so a lot of times if you have a building with a lot of glazing and it's letting in natural light, these daylighting sensors will just basically turn off the lights that basically don't need to be on, which basically saves money. And then occupancy sensors, a lot of times we as humans, we kind of walk in and out of spaces without forgetting to turn off the lights when we leave. And then also they could be programmed through, building operating or building management systems so that when you are turning on lights, it's only when you need them. If you have natural light, take advantage of that. If the room is occupied, take advantage of turning those off automatically and then programming them when you really do need them. So plug loads are also another big one, appliances. So anything that plugs into a wall is basically called a plug load. And again, that's a significant portion of a building's energy use. So when choosing your printers, your monitors, your fridges, anything that basically plugs into a wall, choose the Energy Star rated appliance, or even EPEAT as well. That's kind of accepted here in the States and overseas. So again, just go to energystar.gov and look for products, and then they have basically ratings, basically products in every product category that are Energy Star certified. So again, and they do the same thing. So for instance, my computer monitor is Energy Star certified. It works just as well as one it's not, and it's just the same cost, if not less. And then when you're using it, you're saving money because you're using less energy. So again, anytime you're saving energy, you're saving water, you're producing less waste, you're giving less money to your utilities and your waste haulers. So again, it's going green saves green. That's what I like to say. And then for large building systems, what's really important is to have, they usually have something called a building management system or energy management system. And essentially they do a couple things. One is that they monitor energy use. So again, if you can't manage what you don't monitor or what you measure essentially. So it's basically, so anytime the data kind of points to basically an irregularity. So you have a spike in energy usage, or is a system using more energy than it normally would, you can see that there may be a problem, and you can use that data to kind of narrow down what system is basically not working like it should and then require maintenance. And so again, and it also allows you to program the building. So you can program, temperature set points, not only when occupants are there, but when they're not there. Because a lot of times, there's buildings where the AC is on 24/7 when it really only needs to be on when occupants are there. So, when the occupants are there, the building is conditioned so that when they arrive, it's where it needs to be. And as they leave, that you program maybe a lower or higher temperature depending on the season to what we call setbacks. And so essentially, do you have to have the building it's at 72 degrees at midnight? No, you don't. So you can program that in there, and then also again monitor performance and also water use and so forth. So again, these systems allow you to just basically make sure the systems are working as possible, but also to program them to operate the way you want them to. So emergency strategies for extreme heat conditions. Again, when on hot days, if you have basically heat pumps, generally, especially these mini split systems, you have them in different parts of the building and at home. So on a really, really hot day, maybe the kind of way to reduce costs and reduce energy loads is to basically maybe just cool the living room or wherever the family room is, and then the rooms, the bedrooms, don't cool them as much or keep them to a much higher temperature, because that'll make your energy costs much lower, but it also will put less strain on the grid as well. So again, thinking about that as well, you don't have to cool all the spaces. Also considering, changing your set points. Again, do we need, like on a really hot day, do we need to cool it to 70 degrees? No, we can cool it to 78 and be just as comfortable. you know, and so forth. Backup generators, again, if you're going to have that generator, especially if it's fossil fuel based, just make sure it's doing essential needs. So cooling zones, life support, refrigeration, and the like. And also consider battery backup systems. So, you know, obviously we've got, you know, people have solar panels, they've got these battery, you know, basically solar wall or, you know, battery walls and so forth that can basically, you know, give energy during when the renewables aren't working. So having those is huge. There's tons of stories where basically you have blackouts and people who have battery storage are able to kind of keep their lights on and then keep their fridges going. So again, maybe kind of transition to battery backup. And they also have mobile you know, battery kind of backup generators where they maybe store, you know, maybe anywhere from 1 to 4 kilowatt hours in a battery that you can use. And even EVs can be used to basically power homes and so forth. So that's kind of cool. There's all kinds of options. And if you have to use a gas generated generator, just make sure that it's well ventilated. It's not inside a home, because you hear these tragic stories where folks are, you know, basically put it inside their home or their garage, and the carbon monoxide poisons them, and you know, there's sometimes relating to death, which is sad and tragic. Passive cooling strategies. So again, these are strategies that require no energy. They're designed in nature. You know, basically they're by design. The architect or the builder are basically incorporating these ideas and strategies into the building itself. Again, you know, outdoor shading is a lot more efficient than indoor shading. So for this example, this shade structure is preventing sunlight from getting and hitting the glazing as directly as it is, and it provides shading, so that's a lot more efficient than if you basically didn't have that structure and you had a bunch of kind of window shades on the interior building, because the sunlight is actually penetrating the building, and that you know, that base of the window itself is generating heat. And again, you can, window shades can be horizontal and vertical, recessed, but generally if you can have some sort of physical structure attached to the building that's preventing the shade from reaching those windows, is a good way of doing that. And also, you know, again, here's another example of shade that you don't have to, you know, it doesn't have to be, you know, it can be in different ways. So here, you've got these structures that are basically providing shade depending on the sun angle. And if you notice on the left-hand side of this picture, you have windows that are not have those shade structures, and I pretty much can guarantee you that's north-facing windows. You're getting the least amount of sunlight, even in the summertime. And these other ones are west and east facing. So again, these are not only they make the building look attractive, they're also quite functional. So think about those things as well. And then convection. Again, we've been, you know, basically human culture has been building buildings for quite some time and using the natural properties of air movement to cool their spaces and, you know, provide kind of air movement. So something, you know, basically natural ventilation, using the chimney effect or stack effect, basically as heat rises, it sucks in colder air from the bottom. And if you can design buildings like they have here, these Incas buildings that from the Inca cultures, that's exactly what they're doing here, is that basically using the kind of design of the building to basically to take advantage of the stack effect and kind of cool those spaces for food storage and the like. So we've been doing this for quite some time. Evaporation. Again, this is, you know, you made the issue with this is that if you have, you know, basically if water's, you know, is not an issue, you can do these things like rain curtains. In this case, you have water flowing through these spaces. As water evaporates, it actually cools the air. It gets the energy from the air around it to evaporate, which cools the air. And if that air can be moved into, you know, basically living spaces, you kind of have free air conditioning. But it requires moving water. It requires, you know, so if you're in areas of drought, this may be a bit problematic and, you know, basically not effective. So again, roof ponds, water curtains, and so forth. So, and then also, if you live in a desert, you probably have these what we call swamp coolers. They use water evaporation to cool the air as opposed to refrigerant. So that's something that you can use as well. And then this is a kind of ideal kind of design of a building that's taking in all the different strategies that we've been talking about. Again, you've got, the glazing that basically are oriented correctly. You have pergolas and some other kind of, attached shade structures that basically are preventing summer sun from getting into the windows, but allow the winter sun to get in there. Because sometimes you do want to have that heat gain in the wintertime. So, and then you have these louvered vents that are basically allow cool air to come in and cool the house. You've got, basically taking back to the stack effect. Again, also you have trees that may provide shade in the summertime. Again, if you're in a fire safety zone or fire risk, maybe this strategy is not best for you. And but there are ways to use trees and vegetation to cool space. They just have to be kind of further away from the building, and choosing which types of vegetation is highly important as well. So again, just definitely take, if you're going to use or thinking about using kind of trees and the like for natural shade, definitely, and you live in those fire risk areas, definitely take a look at what you need to do to become fire safe. Geocooling. Again, what's essentially, if the idea here is that if you dig 5 to 6 feet underground, that the temperature of the earth pretty much stays the same year round. And so you can use that to basically have things called ground source heat pumps that can help you heat and cool spaces. So what in this case, you've got, if you want to, in the summertime, you would have, basically a heat exchanger in the ground that basically cools the water, and then that cool water will be used by the heat pump to cool the space. And in the summertime, you can use that heat exchange to actually increase the temperature of the water, and then again the heat pump will use that to heat the space. So again, it's just using kind of, and that's basically free. The heat exchange happens just through just general physics, and you're just designing the pipes so that you have kind of a ground source heat exchange, which is kind of really cool. And then earth coupling, again, in this particular house, people have basements. Generally, basements are cooler than obviously the top floor. So if you have living spaces that are in the basements, it's a lot easier to cool those spaces. Or even if you don't have cooling, then maybe you kind of spend your time in basements, because that's kind of where, and that's using that ground cooling effect to your advantage. Again, subways as well. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to see here. Going to pause here for maybe a 10-minute break. I think we're a little bit ahead of the curve because Solimar's port is about an hour and 15 minutes. Do we have any questions so far before we go to break? Okay, no problem, no worries. So if while we're on break, if you do have a question, then just put it in the chat and I'll monitor that as well. So what we're gonna do is that we'll come back here at 11:30. So go ahead and maybe get a quick bite to eat, stretch and so forth. All right. So if there's no issues with that, we'll go ahead and do that. So I'll see you back here at 11:30. Okay, we got about 1 more minute. We'll get started. Again, if you have any questions, please put those in the chat. Remember, there's no question's a bad question, and most than likely then someone else has that same question you do. So please don't hesitate to put it there. And you may have noticed that I've kind of put my camera off because I'm kind of having a little bit of connection issues. So if I do it again, it's because of that. Don't want to crash. Okay. Hope everyone was able to get some bite to eat or do a quick email or what have you. So, okay, here we go. So we just finished off with earth coupling, essentially, putting things, basically deep in the earth. So not deep in the earth, but, basically underground. This takes those natural cooling properties and uses them kind of passively. Okay, so green walls and green roofs, again, these have the same properties as kind of minimizing heat gain, but for using different strategies. Again, if we have plants on our walls and on our roofs, they absorb that sunlight to basically grow their structures. And there's so many benefits to green roofs, not only for the cooling, but they also kind of clean the air, sound mitigation, provide habitat. They're beautiful, improves air quality. Again, yes, can be a challenge to kind of get started and to design, but it's well known, and it's you just have to have a good design and kind of have it do it with intent when you're basically building the building. That's what you want to have, so that basically it has the maximum chance to basically be effective. Now, one thing about grow roofs is a lot of people say, well, if you're in a drought area, basically using water is that a good idea? Because green roofs and green walls, they do need to be watered. But again, there's many things you can do to minimize the potable water use and get the full value of the green wall, green roof. So, and one of those is water reuse. All right. So, can we use gray water, water capture, stormwater, condensate to basically water our green roofs? So again, we're not using potable water for those things. And again, there's lots of opportunities to do that. Gray water is, essentially it's just needs to be treated just a little bit and then used. If again, people are going as far as basically turning black water into potable water. So again, water reuse. And again, the use the benefits for buildings is huge. Increased biodiversity, again, kind of it's pleasant to be around. It can help mitigate sound, air pollution as well, because again, those plants are absorbing that pollution for us. And then energy efficiency, again, it's basically it reduces heat gain. So there's so many benefits to basically a green roof or green wall system. So again, here's some examples of actually in real life. The Salesforce Transit Center in San Francisco has a park on top of it. All right, so you have a nice, basically, green space. Again, it's a lot cooler to be up there. Basically, and then helps reduce the heat gain of the actual building itself, and provides park space for the residents of the area. And again, here we have a school situation. Where unfortunately there's usually, in some places there's lots of hardscape, and that can be very hot, especially during extreme heat events. So providing shade, using shade structures like this, and especially if you can actually kind of co-locate some solar panels to not only kind of produce shade, but also produce renewable energy for the school or from wherever kind of what's on the site itself, is going to be kind of quite important. And again, by providing shade, you can reduce that kind of heat exposure by 20 degrees Fahrenheit by having shade where they ultimately wouldn't be any. So it's really important for that, again, especially for extreme heat conditions. So we've been talking a lot about, building brand new buildings or design. We've been talking about a lot of existing buildings need to be retrofitted to kind of incorporate what we've been talking about. And so even with kind of reducing the, kind of emissions from buildings by making them more, the building tighter, the building more efficient, easier to cool and heat. If we choose materials kind of upstream to basically get those performance into those buildings, those emissions we might have saved may have been emitted in a different way upstream if we basically chose unsustainable materials. So what we're really trying to reduce is the embodied carbon of all these materials. So again, do we need to basically source raw materials from somewhere far away, and then transport those to somewhere else to be manufactured, again, emitting more emissions, to be transported again to the job site, to be constructed again? There's so many ways we can kind of, reduce that embodied carbon of the materials we're going to be using. Again, using things like post-consumer content, again, using, green roofs, all these different things that we're talking about, reflective paints, windows, and so forth. And also with like paints and insulation, we're also talking about the human health component of choosing these materials. So again, we really want to make sure that we're not doing that. And again, end of life things as well. So there's tools like EC3, LCAs, EPDs, where you can really kind of understand the environmental impact of the materials that you're using. So be mindful of that. Obviously you want performance, but you also want to basically make sure that the embodied carbon pieces are not really kind of impactful. And again, sourcing them locally is huge. So if you're able to find a manufacturer that basically sourced the materials, where you're reducing that transportation component, is huge. Again, you want to choose materials that might have been repurposed. So do we, roofing materials, or, basically steel and concrete, can we reuse all that? Because again, steel and concrete are really massive embodied carbon components to them. And if we can somehow reuse steel or reuse different parts of a building that came, is better than choosing raw materials. And again, choosing non-toxic, low VOC or no VOC materials when you're constructing is important as well. Cool pavement. Again, Solimar is going to go quite a bit into kind of how we can choose our landscapes of the buildings that reside on. But one is kind of cool, is this cool pavement where we're basically painting it white so that it's reflecting light off of there. So, and if you think about it, why that's important is that this picture on the right-hand side in New Delhi, they had a heat wave which literally melted the asphalt. And that just shows you how hot those surfaces can get. And just imagine the heat that was re-radiated. So if you can melt asphalt, just imagine the human beings that were in and around it, how impacted they were. So again, if we can kind of choose surfaces that reflect light by painting them, that could be kind of a way to go as well. Again, you could possibly reducing the kind of the asphalt, the surface temperature by 25 degrees. That's pretty massive, and that'll go a long way to kind of cooling the spaces around them. Permeable pavement, again, Solimar is going to definitely go into this, but ultimately, pervious pavement is good for many reasons. One is it kind of reduces the amount of hardscape. It allows maybe some vegetation to kind of come through. It definitely allows for stormwater capture, allowing that water to go into the groundwater for recharging. It definitely reduces the heat island effects quite a bit, less noise. So again, if you can essentially have pervious pavement in your site for where cars park or people walk, that'll go a long way, like pavers that allow basically that water to kind of filter through instead of having the straight asphalt and straight concrete. Okay, so that's a big piece. And the last bit I'm going to do is homeowner education. Again, as contractors or people that basically may influence homeowners on what they can choose, what materials to choose. And on the flip side, homeowners just basically being aware of what they can choose as well, so that basically both sides are thinking about, kind of the best way to reduce heat gain, best way to kind of, have passive cooling or choose materials that are low VOC and kind of have allow basically light reflectance and so forth. So again, it's really important. So this is kind of like the ideal kind of pie in the sky home. It's not pie in the sky. It's actually quite doable, and there's many of them like this. But this is, imagine an all electric home being powered by 100% carbon free renewable energy. You're theoretically, the operations of this house would have theoretically no emissions associated with it. All right. So you've got an EV, you've got a power wall, battery, you've got induction stoves, you've got heat pump, washer and dryer, heat pumps for space heating, heat pump for water, highly efficient, basically water fixtures. Because again, water efficiency and energy efficiency are basically connected on the energy water nexus. Again, if we're taking shorter hot showers, you're using less energy to heat water, and the amount of energy it takes to move water around the state, treat it, and deliver it is massive as well. So the Energy water nexus is pretty massive. So again, if we can be really water efficient as well. And again, so LED bulbs, so the house has got a timed envelope, highly energy efficient, being powered through solar panels, whether it's at night or being recharged through the day. Battery packs is huge. So again, this is the goal. So if we can have an all electric home powered by carbon-free electricity, the emissions associated with this house is huge. Then again, hopefully the materials we're choosing are as sustainable as possible. And again, practices, okay, I'm setting our thermostats. Do we have to cool our spaces to 70 degrees on a hot day? No. 78 is generally the recommended theory, the temperature. And then on the flip side, when you're super, super cold, do you have to heat it to 75? No, 68 is fine. Hot water heater, again, you usually have the option to choose what temperature the water leaving the tank is. 120 is just fine versus 140. And again, doing LED retrofits is massive, especially LEDs are much, much cheaper now. And again, Energy Star appliances, again, the transportation piece to our lives. Do we have to drive our car alone everywhere we go? No. Carpool, take transit, use e-bikes. If you have to drive a vehicle, make it EV or hybrid. Again, we look for renewable energies, and also now that we have community choice aggregators, almost all of them, like for instance here, San Community Power, have some sort of option where you pay a little bit more for your energy that basically guarantees that the consumption that you had was generated renewably onto the local grid. So that's pretty important as well. And then lastly, we need to act fast, but essentially there's lots of tax credits available to you through the Inflation Reduction Act that are set to expire at the end of this year. So if you had thought about installing solar panels or batteries, anything, energy efficiency, so forth, there's tons of, tax credits and incentives for you to do this. So go ahead and go and investigate those and talk to your contractor to get those, take advantage of those, because they will expire at the end of this year. And if you want to get an EV, those expire at the end of September. So September 30th, those incentives go away. So if you're planning on doing that, act now. Any questions before I hand it back to Solimar for the landscaping portion of this class?
Alrighty, thank you, Robert. Once again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat and we can answer as we go or get back to it at the end of the class. Now we're going to be talking about urban landscapes and outdoor spaces, which is a key strategy for passive cooling. And this involves like incorporating plants and low water landscape elements into our community and building design. Using sustainable design principles, which are biodiversity, permeability, adaptability, and resource efficiency, we can help achieve these goals. So California is actually one of the most biodiverse places in North America, with an estimated count of 6,500 plant species, and that's just the plant species. We have more plant species than any other state in the United States, and about 40 of the plants that are found here are found nowhere else in the world. So by enforcing these sustainable design principles, we can assure that the conservation of our home state continues. Sustainable design practices like biodiversity and permeability factor in, well, different components, but again, meeting the same goal. Biodiversity is designing landscapes that support diverse plant and animal species or different forms of life. This improves ecosystem health and resilience to climate change by having genetic diversity. Biodiverse ecosystems are always more adaptable to a changing environment, and so this provides a benefit on multiple fronts, right? Well, more animals, more insects, more plants are able to thrive in an area, but as well, if there was a change, although more organisms need to adapt to those changes because there's so much interdependence, they're able to usually adapt a lot better. A good case study for that would be the Bisang Ang Mokyo Park in Singapore, where the project focused on providing a new model for tropical urban hydrology through the instrument of landscape infrastructure, which addresses Singapore's dual need for both water supply independence and flash flood management, while creating access to thriving riverine ecology within the dense city. So this is taking into account the natural environment, right? And also the weather factors, the climate factors of for example, flash flooding, which seems to be really prevalent there. So they need to factor all that in. Permeability, on the other hand, is creating structures where water, rainwater specifically, can fall through and infiltrate the soil, which is then recharging the groundwater and reducing runoff. So here we see this image of a pavement that has actually like larger particles towards the bottom, which allows for more filtration down to the soil, versus if it's just like one slab of concrete, nothing's getting through. So permeable pavements can be used on sidewalks and driveways to facilitate the passage of water rather than causing it to flow over or accumulate on that surface like it does happen with asphalt and concrete. This helps to prevent flash floods, prevents toxic runoff from the built environment into our watershed, and also creates underground water reservoirs for trees to access during periods of drought. And now we're going to discuss adaptability and resource efficiency. Adaptability is designing landscapes that can adapt to changing environmental conditions, similarly to what we discussed with the biodiversity, with biodiverse environments being able to adapt easier. Now this is the actual adaptability component of it, which is designing the landscape with that in mind. Because as we are in the midst of climate change already, we are facing extreme heat and drought. But then also on the flip side of that, that can come with really just heavy and short-term rains that then mess us up again. So this ensures long-term viability and reduces the need for frequent maintenance and alterations. And this often means designing our spaces using native plant species, which are already adapted to the local climate conditions, and using the topography of the land as a guide will also help know which plants to put where and how they'll grow best. Don't try to fight the landscape. Use the slope, the sun, the soil, and the permeability as a guide for what plants and design choices you make. Just as we are designing outdoors, or just as we designed indoors with all of that in mind, the same thing, if not with more intention, it goes on outside. Resource efficiency is when we use resources effectively by selecting appropriate plant species, optimizing water usage, and minimizing water generation or waste generation to maximize the sustainability of our landscape. Permaculture, or the practice of mimicking nature in a planned environment, is a great tool here for landscape design. We can observe here, this is the Mission Boulevard Linear Park in California, and it has a lot of reused materials such as unused soil from other parks, reused municipal trees, and that is not only resource effective in terms of these trees were already fallen. However, they're also not having to purchase these materials either at the same price or for any cost at all. So it's less climate impact, less financial impact, and because it was all within the city limits, less of that transportation effect as well. Now, using these design strategies and considering what Robert was talking about regarding material selection, we go into combating the effects of climate change using these regenerative design solutions. Using these natural systems as our guide, we can restore and live in symbiosis with our ecosystem, which makes us more resilient to the effects of climate change while also reducing our emissions simultaneously. So now we're going to focus on biophilic, net zero, permaculture, and reduced hardscape types of designs. Starting with biophilic design. Did you know that currently 54% of the world's population are living in cities, spending an average of 93% of their time indoors? That's crazy. As our lives become increasingly urbanized and technology-driven, we risk losing touch with the natural world around us. The use of biophilic design in landscape offers an efficient approach to improving our lives with the use of natural elements, connecting us to the nature and to the world around us, since the reintroduction of this natural element into our urban landscape provides biodiversity and mitigates the harmful effects of urbanization, such as the heat island effect and carbon emissions. Incorporating natural elements, such as plants and water features, enhances the overall design aesthetic while contributing to a healthier and more comfortable space. Whereas we know that cities, buildings, materials, and products are all man-made, we know that plants, water, wind and air, light and space, raw materials and patterns are naturally occurring. And so being able to implement these natural elements into our man-made designs already helps us achieve that goal. Now, using this type of design sorry, I'm skipping a slide here. These design principles, we see 4 examples here of nature being used in the built environment. We see this bench that was made out of bamboo, a green wall, a rain garden, and then benches that were and tables made from stone. So using these natural materials for furniture and other elements of the design makes everything like an actual part of the environment, right? And so the green walls and green roofs are a great feature that can help improve the air quality as well as insulate the building, providing shaded areas and also just create like a good visual connection in nature, whether like that's on the side of a building, that's a coffee shop or an apartment building, you know, it's something that's like very nice to look at. Incorporating spaces with water, such as a rain garden, is not only nice looking, but it also has like acoustic soothing benefits and can help manage the stormwater runoff, which is like the larger goal here. If any of you guys have an example of nature being used in design that you can appreciate or one that is your favorite, go ahead and feel free to leave it in the chat. And let's talk about some net zero design, which focuses on achieving a balance between resource consumption and conservation. It offers many environmental benefits, including mitigating the urban heat island effect, managing stormwater effectively, and creating habitats for local flora and fauna. These practices are crucial in addressing climate change and strengthening ecological balance. Net zero design can also be integrated to the roof of buildings. This image shows the impact of traditional versus net zero landscaping on the heat retention and stormwater runoff of virtually what would be the same building. Overall, less energy use leads to a lower carbon footprint, mitigating impacts of climate change. So we see here water conservation by the implementation of effective irrigation systems, drought tolerant native plants. Okay. And then we see energy efficiency because there's solar powered features like the lighting and the water pumps. And waste reduction by a reuse of materials, implementing systems of composting, and utilizing mulch to minimize water evaporation and weed growth. So here on this building, it may be a little bit different, right? Because this is a building that's tall and it maybe doesn't necessarily have a lot of green space on the ground level. But knowing that the top of their roof is being hit with sun regardless, they're putting in that green roof ideally with native plants and saving on a lot. When we start looking at new construction projects, we need to be mindful of where we're selecting our site, about the materials that we're sourcing, where are we sourcing them, is this technology sustainable, doing high performing building envelopes, passive cooling and design strategies, clean energy and high performance heating and cooling. So these are recommendations by the Urban Land Institute, which recommends these strategies when building a net zero building site. The site selection contributes to how people interact with the building, such as its accessibility. Whereas sourcing your material sustainably, again, reduces that carbon footprint of your project, not just from the beginning, but in the long term as well. And the building envelope is essential for temperature regulation. So using passive cooling strategies will also reduce energy load with the lighting and the cooling, as well as the water use in the landscapes. And because of that, clean energy power sources are essential for also reaching net zero, regardless of whether the project is new or more so like a retrofit. The designers and planners need to be informed by the power of nature on human health and on the designs that they construct. Net zero design integrates with the environment, reducing the consumption of non-renewable resources, minimizing waste, while also moving towards the creation of carbon neutrality. Now, as I was mentioning, and what was previously mentioned by Robert as well, is the urban heat island. So it's pretty much a concrete jungle, especially in large metropolitan areas like Los Angeles. So when we're talking about cities with extreme heat, and specifically like in California, one important element to consider is that, well, yeah, nearly 30% or 40% of land cover in urban areas is using conventional paving materials, and these materials can reach a high peak of anywhere from 120 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit. And yeah, we're actually walking on these pavements. That's wild. Heat waves have been identified as one of the deadliest meteorological hazards in the recent years, and this is affecting all populations globally. But again, we like Los Angeles being a large metropolitan area feels those effects even more steeply. Benefits of reduced hardscape. So we've talked about already what's the dangers of using conventional materials still, of not incorporating any greenery or passive cooling methods. But let's actually look at some comparisons between the lack of heat absorption or cooling compared to using these permeable surfaces. So here we have several examples, including heat absorption, which is we look at this conventional hardscape, which has anywhere from 70 to 90% of heat absorption, which is extremely high. So of the heat that's coming down on it, it's absorbing anywhere from 70 to 90%. Yikes. Versus using a permeable surface, the heat absorption is anywhere from 10 to 30%. So it's literally on the opposite side of that spectrum. Using evaporative cooling methods, if we look at the conventional hardscape cooling ability, it's nearly 0% because there's nothing, like everything's just sitting on the top. There's nothing to cool. All the heat is just sitting there. Versus if we have a permeable surface, whether it's a green roof, a green wall, trees for shade, we see that absorption of that heat can be up to 50%. And the albedo effect, which is how reflective the sunlight or how reflective of the sunlight that surface is. If we look at a conventional hardscape, it's only about 20 to 40% of that sunlight reflecting. Whereas with the permeable, up to 20 to 40% of the sunlight reflecting, whereas with permeable surfaces or green spaces, we see anywhere of like 5 to 23% of the sunlight being reflected off. And also the quality of our air improves a lot, especially the more actual like living organisms you put in, like trees, plants, etc. We see an improvement of anywhere from 10 to 30% in the air quality in areas with significant reductions in hardscape and substantial incorporation of permeable surfaces and green spaces. And if we make this more of an industry standard or a company standard wherever it is that we work, or if we own the practice, then really this could become something that is that you are well known for and you're able to replicate time and time again in different projects, thus making this more of a regular thing. Greenscape and ground cover. In addition to the permeable surfaces, another approach to reducing hardscape would be to incorporate green space or ground cover into landscapes. This involves replacing traditional hardscape elements with vegetation such as lawns, gardens, or native plantings, which provide many environmental benefits. But just to note that I don't mean personally like a traditional lawn, right? Because there can be ground covers that are not really providing much benefit, while there's other ground covers that do. So it's all about plant selection, because we want to restore the natural systems through regenerative design solutions. So that doesn't mean that we want to plant another invasive plant in the front, right? Like we really want to think about what we're going to put. And we want to put plants that are going to improve the air quality by trapping the pollutants and releasing oxygen through the photosynthesis process. And lastly, the main goal is to mitigate the urban heat island effect by reducing the amount of heat absorbing surfaces such as concrete and asphalt, or even like, what is it called? Decomposed granite. Like, again, those are all really heat absorbing. So it's not necessarily always the best when we can put something green and something that's live. Now let's talk a little bit more about native plants and regenerative food forests. We can combat the effects of climate change using regenerative design solutions. Using these natural systems as our guide, we can restore and live in symbiosis with our ecosystem, which makes us more resilient to these effects of climate change while reducing our emissions. So we can support our health and our food requirements of our large urban communities with regenerative agriculture. But we need to redesign the way that we grow food because, well, industrialized agriculture not just causes chronic illnesses and is like a main killer of biodiversity and a main factor for climate change, but it's not integrated. You know, it is an industry, and it fails to meet the regenerative design components that we just discussed as well. So let's talk a little bit more about indigenous traditional ecological knowledge, because this is the way that we can do this most respectfully and following these principles more closely. So indigenous indigenous traditional ecological knowledge, or like regenerative agriculture or permaculture, sometimes these terms are used interchangeably when that's not necessarily true, right? We have a lot of enthusiasm for regenerative agriculture and permaculture, but really it's a rebrand of ancient concepts that are original to indigenous people around the world and have existed for centuries on centuries, and is definitely nothing new. So due to the long and horrific history of colonialism, of land theft, and a whole bunch of other stuff, the global north often refers to indigenous people culture and knowledge in like a past tense, but that's not true. Still today, indigenous people are indisputably the best stewards of land and are the ones that hold over 80% of the world's diversity and diversity protections, even though they're a very small percentage of the global population still. So while modern industrial agriculture is responsible for 80% of global deforestation, loss of biodiversity, creation of illnesses, et cetera, the contrary is true for indigenous people. And so learning from indigenous people on how they tend to the land and how we can do so maybe in our own dynamics and our own relationship with the land is really important, because Western society is really, really behind in terms of like following and respecting indigenous knowledge. And I mean, we all live on the same planet Earth. So if we are not doing our best to, try to follow these traditions and apply them as we best know how, then we are actively contributing to our own harm. So just something to consider. Now let's talk about maintaining some natural spaces, because yeah, using permaculture pulls from different concepts, including traditional ecological knowledge. But the 12 principles of permaculture are creatively using and responding to change, observing and interacting, catching and storing energy, obtaining a yield, applying self-regulation, and accepting feedback, using renewable sources, producing no waste, using design from patterns to details, integrating rather than segregating, using small and slow solutions, using and valuing diversity, using the edges. So these are the 12 principles of permaculture. And the vision of permaculture is pretty much a human culture or human existence that dynamically sustains like a global landscape that is permanently abundant. So this is trying to mimic nature, learning how the plants best thrive in an environment and creating those conditions into the garden by, incorporating certain plants, animals, and fungal species together, right? And creating the environment for them to now work in symbiosis. Or like pretty much planting multiple plants together versus having like rows of monoculture, which can contribute to that loss of biodiversity. Now let's look at some of the possibilities of green space, green cover that we can put, because we know that trees can be different sizes, but there's also other types of plants that we can put. So we see here, these are all numbered out, with our largest tree being the overstory tree layer, the second tree being the understory tree layer. Then we have some shrubs, some herbs, the herbaceous layer. Number 5, the root layer. 6, the ground cover layer. And 7, the vine layer. Urban forests offer environmentally a lot of benefits, and also socially, right? Especially when we are incorporating medicinal, edible plants into these built environments. Urban food forests also increase biodiversity and support native and migratory birds and pollinators. They mitigate climate change by sequestering carbon dioxide and reducing the need for fossil fuel intensive farming practices. Food forests also serve as educational resources, teaching communities about permaculture, ecology, and sustainable living practices. We can provide an abundance of variety of foods ranging from fruits, berries, vegetables, roots, herbs, and not only do they require very little input and maintenance since they replicate the natural systems, they also create a habitat for the local wildlife, pest control, and pollination. And because they do not require chemical inputs, they produce much more healthier foods, much more nutrient-dense foods and products. We do want to strategize about how we design our tree canopy. We want to make sure that, but we do want to put one in, just to be clear. We do want a tree canopy because it does improve our air quality and it lowers those greenhouse gas emissions. It enhances our stormwater management and water quality, reduces our energy use, reduces pavement maintenance, and improves our quality of life. We know that trees are key to reducing the urban heat island effect. Now, what's on us is to learn about what native trees in our area works best for shade, which ones work best for carbon sequestration, and which ones are drought tolerant. Ideally, if we know the native trees to our area, those are for sure the best ones. Even if it's a native tree from somewhere else in California, if you can find the one that's native to your area, definitely much better. The strategic placement of trees can lead to temperature drop of up to 15 degrees. And so we want to make sure that we're choosing the right trees for where we're from or where we live or where this project is at. This reduction is not only a relief from the strong heat, but it's also like an energy efficiency thing because it's decreasing the demand for air conditioning and artificial cooling. I would recommend live oaks or western redwood. Now, creating some cooling corridors is going to be super key as well. We see in this image, it's pretty much a bunch of trees that are planted alongside the road through the traffic barriers, and as well on the opposite side, on the side of the sidewalk where we see that there's community members walking there. This type of design makes sure that on both sides, so the cars are not getting hit with all the sun, but neither are anybody that's a pedestrian. So this placement of trees for effective shading and impact on local temperature reduction, if done correctly, provides shading for a large amount of space. And that creates a cooling corridor. And this also improves the microclimate because let's say the temperature is reduced by, let's say 5 degrees. That's way better. That's 5 degrees less hot that you are going to be throughout the day, throughout your days, right? So the trees and vegetation, they reduce the urban heat island effect. They contribute to that improved air quality because they are absorbing those pollutants, let's say from the cars, the emissions, but also some of the noise. Trees can mitigate some of the noise as well, and then lowers those greenhouse gas emissions. And because they're live trees, they're also supporting in storm water management and water quality, and that reduces a whole lot of pavement maintenance issues that can come with having to install irrigation and coming to tend to the plants, etc. Let's talk about some native plants. There's a whole lot of native plants, including that this is their home. This is where they're from, and this is where they've been for thousands of years. But looking on the more project side of it, we know that the benefits include water conservation, lower maintenance requirements, pesticide-free gardening, and ecological support. They are very well adapted to dry landscapes now, especially because California has gotten drier. But regardless, California has always been a place that has a lot of different environments within it. So with that, and like previously mentioned, California has such a wide variety of species, plant species that are native to here and throughout all of its environments. So with that being said, most of these California native plants, if placed in their actual native regions within California, they need very minimal maintenance and irrigation besides what is like normal rainfall, so that's super effective. And they're really built against the pests and diseases. And even though a lot of these pests and diseases have came in the past few hundred years, like they still help us with protecting our crop plants from these pests. Of course, as also being like huge pollinators. Super great. Let's go and talk about some of these native plants that are actually drought resistant, because that's most of them, but due to a lack of water, they learn to retain hydration, and this makes them less likely to combust and also really resilient to extreme heat and heat waves, which we're seeing become more and more prevalent. So these that I'm going to name, we have images here. I would also recommend looking them up on Calscape. If you don't know what Calscape is, it's a really great resource. You can type in the zip code or the address of where the project is at, and it will give you a list of plants that are native to that region. And so that can honestly be something that you know, you can bring to your client pretty much a palette of local native plants and have them choose from there, or you do the selection depending on how the project goes. But three of these plants are yarrow, California lilac, and California buckwheat. These are honestly, yarrow is really medicinal in a lot of ways, and both the California lilac, the yarrow, and the buckwheat are all like super, super good food for our pollinators. I always see them. Well, in my native plant gardens, I see them a lot, always close to these plants. If we look though at the overstory and at the understory tree layer, we have the coast live oak, the California black walnut, and the California laurel. The coast live oak is a native tree that's adequate for the overstory layer of a food forest, aka the big tree. It provides ample shade and habitat for the wildlife, as well as acorns, which are edible after processing. And they're edible for a lot of animals, including humans. So that's something to consider as well. But please always leave the first drop for the animals. Black walnut is also another native tree, and it's suitable for the overstory layer as well. And this also provides edible nuts and provides shade, and it's a valuable habitat for so many species, so much wildlife. Lastly, the California laurel is an evergreen tree that can serve as a shade providing element in the food forest. Its leaves are aromatic and edible and can be used as a culinary herb, and it also is attractive to pollinators and beneficial insects. When we look at shrubs, herbs, and vine layers, some common ones include common manzanita, toyon, and California grape. With manzanita, there's actually several species of native manzanita to California, and all of them are pretty well suited for the shrub layer because they provide nectar for pollinators, berries for wildlife, and some of the species have berries that are actually also edible to humans. Just be mindful because not all of them are. Toyon is also known as California holly. It's a versatile shrub, and it can be used as well the shrub layer in the food forest. It provides clusters of bright red berries, and they are edible for birds and small mammals. And the berries can also be made into jams, jellies, etc. for human consumption. Also, toyon provides year-round greenery, and it's a habitat for birds and insects. Lastly, California wild grape. The vine can be trained to grow along trellises or over other arbors or trees in the food forest. And it provides small sweet grapes that are edible and can be used for making jams and eating fresh or eaten fresh. And of course, it's also another home for wildlife. So just thinking about how focusing on native plants doesn't mean that we are restricted, right? Because a lot of these are edible. So just something to think about. Now let's look at our roots and our ground cover, which is really the layer that is important when we're thinking about lawn replacement, hierbabuena, woodland strawberry, and California wild rose are just three examples of a ground cover layer, which, you know, ground cover is mostly for the soil health and to control erosion and to retain moisture. So keep this in mind. And also I would say yarrow can be a good ground cover as well. So it can be applicable to many parts of it. But anyways, back to this. Hierbabuena is a low-growing perennial herb, which is native to California, and it spreads as a ground cover. Its leaves have a minty flavor and can be used for culinary purposes, such as in teas and leaves. Secondly, woodland strawberry is a low-growing perennial, and it serves as an excellent ground cover in a food forest. It provides small, flavorful strawberries that are edible and enjoyed by wildlife and humans alike. The plant, it spreads through runners, so it runs horizontally, and that forms a dense mat that helps to suppress weeds and prevent soil erosion. Also, woodland strawberries attract pollinators with its little white flowers, and this contributes to the overall biodiversity of the food forest ecosystem, as well as to the nutrient density of the strawberries that the plant produces. Lastly, California wild rose is a native rose species that forms thickets and spreads as a ground cover. It produces fragrant pink flowers and attracts pollinators and produces rose hips, which are edible and also rich in vitamin C. Now, we talked about some good examples that you can put in as your green layers or your urban canopy, but we do want to make sure that we discuss what plants to avoid, because being marketed as drought resistance doesn't mean that it's actually beneficial or yeah, beneficial to your project. It's very common that you go to Lowe's, you go to Home Depot, you go to the conventional nurseries, and you find invasive grasses. And oh my gosh, invasive grasses like pampas, feather grasses, and Pride of Madeira, which are dry and combustible. This actually is a huge risk of wildfire damage and also outcompetes the native grasses and shrubs, which erodes that native barrier or fortress, that we're trying to build. So it's super, super important that you avoid plants that are summer dormant unless they're being watered year round. Plants that produce dry leaf litter and duff that accumulates atop of the soil and on top of the other plants around, because then those plants can also catch fire because of this plant that has particles that go up. Trees and shrubs with dry and peeling bark, so eucalyptus. Shrubs and trees that retain clusters of dead leaves and branches, such as palms, once again, eucalyptus, Italian cypress, or dry grasses that grow green in the winter and turn yellow and brown in the summer. All of these indicate that they are really easy to get on fire and they will cause a huge problem. Palm trees, although super iconic to the California idyllic situation that's been crafted, are actually super dangerous. They're not native to here at all. They're not even from this continent. So it's not true that they're well adapted to this area. Their dry nature, their tall height, it allows for fires to like embers, first of all, to fly and land upon the fronds, and then also the fires to climb up the tree. So it's just a fire risk for a whole lot of reasons, and you really don't want that. And because it's technically a grass, it has really shallow root systems, which, because they're not from this region and they're not adapted to this type of soil, really, they fall down easily in winds and storms, and sometimes even just through poor maintenance, which, because palm trees are such a high maintenance tree, it's really easy to forget a step. And I really, really do want to advise fully and 1,000% against palm trees because they're so dangerous. Actually, just in my city, like 2 or 3 weeks ago, a woman and her family, they were like playing mini golf and a tree fell, and so now her arm is amputated because the tree fell on top of her. So it is really, really a dangerous tree, and I really think that we should be loudly discouraging the planting of palm trees. Lastly, artificial turf, also it's mostly just plastic, so it is increasing that urban heat island effect, and it's literally plastic, so you're just planting, I mean, not even planting, you're standing on top of layers of plastic. Your dogs or your animals are playing on that. Your kids are playing on that, and it's just an increased heat risk, which can also increase the likelihood of kids getting burnt, your pets getting burnt, yourself getting burnt. And then now you're using water to cool off a plastic sheet when you could have used water to water something. So it's really counteractive, and I also highly discourage the implementation of artificial turf. But if you look at the California Invasive Plant Council list, they have a list of invasive species. So these are just a very few that we mention, and they're really prevalent in California landscaping, especially. So I would really recommend everybody to go visit that invasive species list, scan this QR code, and really get to understand which plants can be actually extremely dangerous. We don't want to be ignorant to this, and then later down the line, knowing that we could have done better. Because also there is turf replacements and tree rebates. I don't know if there's like an expiry on this, kind of like what Robert was mentioning regarding, or maybe Kaelyn mentioned it earlier in the class regarding some rebates on like EVs and stuff like that. But so I don't know if there's like an expiry on this, but in Los Angeles, you can get $100 for replacing turf and a tree within the turf replacement program. So this began in March 4th of 2024, and applicants that are eligible to receive the compensation will be compensated for up to 5 trees, so $500. And the installation of each new eligible tree in the turf replacement program or project area will count as 3 plants towards the total turf replacement project plant count requirement. So 1 tree counts for 3. So if you guys have access to this, this is definitely a good program to look into. let's talk about soil building for carbon sequestration. We see two trees here and two different types of soils, two different types of root systems. We know that healthy soil captures carbon. Healthy soil has cooling effects, and healthy soil holds moisture and water. In order to hold moisture and capture the carbon, soil needs to be alive, and the living bacteria needs to be present with the water and the oxygen. Soils that are rich in humus or organic material have stronger mycorrhizal bacteria, helping the plant sequester carbon more efficiently and maintain water levels during a drought. Soil health is super key for long-term plant health and especially trees. Soil is a crucial reservoir for carbon, and it stores more carbon than all living plants, animals, and the atmosphere combined, highlighting its critical role in climate regulation. Typical healthy soil consists of about 45% minerals, which is clay, silt, sand, rock, 25% water, 25% air, and 5% organic matter. The primary agents of carbon storage in soil are the microbes, including bacteria and fungi. They are crucial for maintaining healthy soil composition by breaking down organic matter and releasing the enzymes that facilitate nutrient recycling. Certain microbial communities in healthy soils can suppress plant diseases by outcompeting the pathogens or by stimulating plant defense mechanisms, contributing to that overall soil health. A well-structured soil with good aggregation or good amends allows for proper aeration, water infiltration, and root penetration, promoting microbial diversity and activity. It's also really rich in essential nutrients such as nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which are essential for plant growth and microbial metabolism. All of this is a stark comparison to unhealthy soil, which is compacted, it's dry, it has very little, if any, nutrients or life, and therefore it's not able to perform its function of being soil. Like, that's just dirt, you know, dirt is dead soil, but we want healthy soil and it's alive. Yeah. Speaking a little bit more on dirt, because dirt is dead soil. Yeah, it's dried out, it can't absorb water easily, which also, you know, it really would mean that we would have to be using up more water and for less of a positive effect, because this hydrophobic soil, it's so hydrophobic because it's so compacted, and it's so compacted because there's no life. And so usually when there's no life in it, that means that there's only the minerals in it, the clay, and clay is easy to compact. And so when you're watering clay, you're just making clay wet. You're not necessarily activating any of the microbial life in there. Whereas if you're building compost, you know, if you're really focused on building your soil, you are like making sure that there is the organic matter in there, which is all the food that the microbes need to live, to multiply, and to actually do their job of yeah, like protecting and just existing really is the main part of like why our soil is healthy, is because there is biodiversity in there. So simply providing the environment for the microbes, the bacteria, the fungi to do what they're supposed to do, and providing them, you know, things that are decomposing for them to decompose, is like the main way that we activate this life cycle. Groundwater. There's different ways that we can, you know, groundwater, I mean, I guess not groundwater, water in general, it doesn't just come from the ocean or from the rivers, right? So let's talk a little bit about that. So groundwater is water that's found beneath the Earth's surface in soil pore spaces, PORE spaces, and in the fractures of rock formations. It's a vital natural resource that supplies waters to wells and to springs. An aquifer is an underground water storage for the groundwater, and it's made of an underground layer of permeable rock, sediment, or soil that then contains the water and allows for it to flow freely. Aquifers serve as natural reservoirs and storage areas for groundwater, and they provide a sustainable source of water for the wells, springs, and streams. A watershed, also known as a catchment area, is an area of land that drains all the streams and rainfall to a common outlet, such as a river, lake, or ocean. It is defined by the topography of the landscape and acts as a natural boundary for the flow of water. A water table is the upper surface of an aquifer, where groundwater pressure is equal to atmospheric pressure. It represents the boundary between the unsaturated zone above where the soil pores contain both air and water, and the saturated zone below, where all available pore spaces are filled with water. How do we recharge our groundwater? Well, first of all, recharging groundwater is essential for restoring the water cycle. It maintains water levels in aquifers, rivers, and streams, and it supports aquatic ecosystems. The water cycle captures rain at the top of our watershed, which in the case of Los Angeles would be the San Gabriel and Santa Monica Mountains, and distributes it throughout the watershed through rivers and streams. In the San Gabriel Valley, water districts release excess water from the San Gabriel Reservoir to recharge groundwater throughout the San Gabriel River watershed. Implementing deep groundwater storage and landscaping involves strategies aimed at maximizing water retention in the soil and promoting infiltration into underground water aquifers. Deep groundwater is essential for survival of trees during periods of drought, keeping our communities cool and keeping soil healthy so it can capture and store yet more carbon. Some methods to implement this concept are permeable surfaces, rain gardens, drought-tolerant plants, aka native plants, and mulching, which we've discussed previously. Now let's look at bioswales and rain gardens. This has honestly been one of the more fun things to learn about. These vegetated channels, they collect and slow the flow of the stormwater, and this also allows for it to penetrate into the ground and recharge like deep groundwater levels versus just like being water that pulls at the surface or being water that just runs through and therefore doesn't reach the groundwater aspect of it. This stored water through like the bioswales and the rain gardens, it becomes a vital source for the trees during extended periods of drought and heat. So some main elements of a bioswale are native plants. They're usually planted with native vegetation because they're well adapted to the climate, the soil conditions, and the rainfall patterns of the region, making them more resilient and requiring less maintenance. A ponding area, which is a shallow depression or basin within the bioswale, and it's designed to temporarily collect and hold the stormwater runoff. This allows the water to slow down and infiltrate into the soil gradually, which reduces the risk of flooding downstream, and it promotes the groundwater recharge. The ponding area also provides an opportunity for sediment and pollutants to settle out of the water, which then improves the water quality because that pollutant's not making it back underwater, which then it's going to come up and then it's going to go through the whole water cycle, but polluted. A drainage area is the surrounding landscape or watershed that contributes the stormwater runoff to the bioswale. So this can include the rooftops, the roads, the sidewalks, or other impervious surfaces that generate runoff during rain events. By intercepting and treating this runoff from the drainage area, the bioswales actually help to reduce the volume and the velocity of the stormwater entering the downstream water bodies, minimizing the erosion, flooding, and pollution. So what this means is that this drainage area catches the water coming off the roofs and such, so that it catches somewhere and filters out so that it's not going directly from the roof onto the ground, onto the street, into a gutter, and then it's polluted. And then an inlet is the point where the stormwater runoff actually enters the bioswale. So this can consist of a curb cut or a graded opening in the pavement, which directs the runoff from the streets, parking lots, and other impervious surfaces into the bioswale. So similar to the drainage area, but not the same. The inlet is strategically located to capture and divert the stormwater runoff before it actually reaches like the larger drainage systems, right? The ones that are not part of the bioswale. So these types of designs are not only beautiful and have like an aesthetic function, but they actually are really critical for helping restoring our groundwater, reducing pollution and runoff. And it's also like a natural way to be able to provide maintenance for your native plants without having to be there week after week maintaining them. Permeable surfaces are what allow water to penetrate the ground, reducing the runoff and soil erosion. Advantages include improved water management, groundwater recharge, and reduced flood risks. Some examples of permeable material are porous concrete, permeable pavers, gravel, and grass pavers. We see three pretty good examples right here. This porous concrete I mean, it's in the name that it's porous, but you can see that the particles of concrete, it's not like a slush or like a slurry like we see most of the time with concrete being. These are thicker particles. It kind of looks like they made like concrete Dippin' Dots and they put it all together. And so because there is gaps in between the concrete, that allows for water to actually go through and reach below, you know, to the surfaces and the layers of the earth below that. As well as the gravel, similar concept, right? It's laid down, it's rocks pretty much. So the rain should be able to get through to the bottom. And it kind of also provides, depending on the situation, it can provide like a form of ground cover. And grass pavers are what we see like in the third image, and it's pretty much like blocks that have grass also growing in them. So they are blocks, they are concrete blocks, but they also have greenage growing in the in-betweens of them so that it's still a permeable surface. Looking at drought tolerant landscape maintenance, we know that some plants do better when they're in companions or in groups, and this also meets our design principles, our biophilic design principles. California native plants, they need less water or no water during winter or heavy rain months sometimes. And soil health is key for this long-term plant health and water retention. So I just want to recommend you guys to leave the leaves. If a tree, let's say an oak, is dropping leaves, it's okay to just leave them on the ground. Not everything has to be raked up and bagged up, you know, because the tree is actually providing its own mulch at this point and being able to sustain itself and protect itself against moisture loss, you know, and erosion. As well as let's talk some more about all of this because there's really a lot of benefits of leaf mulch. Fallen leaves acting as a natural mulch, yes. They do regulate the soil temperature. They do help with soil retention or moisture retention in the soil, but also they work as weed repression because, well, let's just think of the leaves as like a blanket, and because of the blanket, none of the weed seeds are being able to actually germinate and come up and therefore grow and therefore take over. And lastly, the nutrient recycling, because these leaves do contain the essential nutrients of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. As they're decomposing back into the soil, these nutrients are released back. So it's just a really neat way that allowing nature to do its job is helping us all around. Mulch and weather leaf litter or other added compost or wood chip material have multiple benefits. We see in this image, we have one side of this tomato plant that has mulch and another side of this tomato plant that has no mulch. The side that has mulch at that current moment of the day, it's actually sunny. But we see that because this is organic mulch, it's keeping the sunlight out, it's minimizing any of the evaporation that would happen because of the sun, and this helps retain the water. Also, because of that organic mulch breaking down, those nutrients are released into the soil. Now, we look on the other side where it's raining, where there's no mulch. There's no mulch, which means there's no protection against erosion or nutrient loss, because erosion always means nutrient loss. And when there is heat, when there is sun out and not rain, all the nutrients, all the bacterial life is pretty much drying out from that heat. We want to reduce the evaporation by keeping our plant roots moist, but we also don't want them to be covered, like the tree to be covered like we see in this graphic as well, where then we're pretty much suffocating the tree. We want to make sure that the tree is visible at the base and that we're providing a flat, even layer around the tree, not a pile of mulch at the base of the tree. Yeah. Now, intercropping and companion planting. So companion planting has mutual benefits to the plants and to the soil. Yeah, mostly being pest control and nitrogen fixation. I know, for example, in some of the gardens that I work in, where it's like mostly food gardens, but we're putting native plants in as well. We have like I would call it like a very militant, a very militant planting of milkweeds, narrow leaf milkweeds, which are like taken over by aphids pretty much. and that protects every other crop within the garden to actually be protected from these pests. So that's like really super cool. And of course, companion planting also helps with like nitrogen fixation and nutrient renewals again, right? Because like these plants are pretty much communicating with each other, and some plants take more nutrients than other plants. And also at the same time, plants have nutrients within themselves, and so they're able to replenish certain nutrients into the soil as well. And this creates a self-sustaining ecosystem where there's no real need for chemical or synthetic fertilizer because the plants and you are taking care of each other. Also, this maximizes land use efficiency because it's working with nature instead of against it. And that also, yeah, it just makes like a more easy to maintain landscape. And also because you're not separating things by like, oh, this is my row of berries, this is my row of tomatoes, this is my row of et cetera, et cetera. Instead of separating it like that, you're able to actually be more efficient and be more mindful of what you really will use and need based on planting things together. And that also makes you more mindful of the seasons. So it's just another way of being mindful and of being, yeah, being a strategic planner. If anybody knows of any good companion planting combinations that they want to share, feel free to leave them in the comments. But let's move on to drip irrigation and seasonal watering. Drip irrigation systems, they deliver water directly to the root zone of the plants, which then reduces water waste through evaporation and runoff because it's straight to the source. This watering method ensures that plants receive adequate moisture without saturating the soil or the foliage, which can increase the likelihood of disease. And research indicates that these like drip irrigation is extremely effective, up to 90% more effective than other watering methods. Also, deep and frequent waterings are another good method to use, especially with like trees, because it imitates a rain cycle, which then like the plant is going to be less stressed and also have like more consistent growth. Irrigation and water controllers are also something that has been, I mean, they have existed for a while, but now especially they are, with the developments of technology, they're really able to be more accurate. Smart sensors and telemetry systems gather data on water flow, quality, and reservoir levels. This data is combined with weather forecasts to help water management or water managers make informed decisions. Water resource management uses precipitation, groundwater, and snowpack data to assess water availability, inform allocation decisions, and promote sustainable water usage. So even like because there's apps and all these sensors and stuff, you can have scheduled waterings that pause if the sensor detects that there's already natural rainwater watering happening. So I just think there's a lot of cool tools now for irrigation and water control. So if you're working on a new project especially, it would be really great to bring these options to your clients. But does anybody have any questions?
About any of the content that we've done?
Yeah, we're pretty much about to conclude. So if anybody has any questions.
Hi, I can jump in. Asmita here. Thank you so much. This has been amazing. I think what I really struggle with as a designer is because I'm also a tenant. How do we really incorporate all these good things, or how do you communicate with your management in incorporating some of the small swaps as a tenant for the whole facility? I think that's something that I struggle with because I live on the second floor and I have in my living room floor to, wall ceiling, windows, floor to ceiling windows. And today, especially with the extreme heat warning, I'm melting even inside my room. So I don't know how do we communicate that, or if there are any resources around that.
I'll jump in first. I think with landlords, a lot of times you want to find a way to make it worth their while, like a return on investment, because ultimately property managers and landlords, that's the base thing, unfortunately. So if you can do some research where you can say, hey, we can do this, but here's a way to make it cheaper, like say for instance, any kind of utility rebates, and so forth, that, you know, as far as like kind of like any landscaping you want to do, any sort of other thing like that, like, you know, what, you know, resource management like thing. But as far as like putting, you know, external shade structures on the building, you might want to start thinking about kind of the health effects of other tenants. So if you basically have other tenants who have the same problem, if you all come to the landlord and say, hey, like, we're melting, this is unhealthy, they may go, okay, it's time for me to do something different. Someone
Right.
think.
Yeah, definitely I would recommend that. And then also just like on the renter aspect of it, because I as well rent. Depending on what the setup is of where you live, you know, you may also be able to put in like temporary, like renter friendly options. I know for myself, in previous places that I lived, I've just had to install like curtains that, you know, really are going to block out all that sun. Not because I don't want to see the sun, but because I'm not trying to be hot all the time. And that's just a short-term solution that could help you as well. So that,
Right.
you know, you're not overheating as well, or like a container box for native plants that it is possible. Like native plants can do okay in containers. So and I think one that would do really good in a container is like a foothill penstemon, which I didn't bring up at all today. And I can leave that in the chat. But yeah, sometimes it's like personal adaptation, but really I do appreciate that you're thinking of like the overall large building, you know. So I definitely agree with what Robert said regarding you know, convening with your other neighbors and really seeing if this is something that, you know, other people resonate on, and then really bringing it with some research to your landlord so that there's
Right.
interest and action.
Yeah, thank you so much. I would be interested in the container planting of native plants because I think that's something that I haven't tried. I have a lot of plants, but now that you showed the combinations and how you can mitigate heat in your own balconies, that would be amazing to learn more.
Yes, I can. If you send me a direct message on here, I'll go ahead and provide you my contact details as well. We can talk some more.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much.
Of course. All right. Is there any other questions, or shall we move on to the conclusion? All righty. So really, as we reach the conclusion, I hope that there was a lot of learning, and that, you know, we can really see how there's a lot of room to change these standards and create new ones. Through adaptation and mitigation strategies, we really can keep our workers safe and build communities that are climate resilient. We do have the tools to design sustainable urban areas. However, we just really need to make it the norm. Adapting for climate resilience. We have to adapt in order to be resilient to climate change. In the past, we thought that lawns were beautiful, but this is an old tradition. We're challenging our perception of what is beautiful in order to be more resilient. The systems that have brought us here are not sustainable, and we need to be creative in order to reimagine what our future looks like. Our built environment can prioritize the health of all people over capital gain, setting the standard for urban development moving forward. So, because the climate is changing, the industry must also change along with it. Learning as new technology and information is available is super key. Being open-minded to new practices and always advocating for worker safety and healthcare. What can we do to encourage behavioral change in our industry or in our community? Firstly, we need to start the conversations. We need to help our coworkers, our neighbors, and our clients understand the importance of climate resilience. We need to keep learning, because cutting edge technology for climate resilience is pretty much here. We just need to use it and show that there is interest for it. And finally, set the standard. Policy and regulations do take time and they move slow, but we in the industry and our companies, we can change our practices now. We set the standards for our clients. We set the standards for our business. We are the front line for defense for building climate resilient communities. We are the ambassadors for climate change and the standards for the future of green building. So when you speak, use this lens of public health and safety to explain the importance of these industry changes. Now, lastly, I'm going to briefly discuss the instructions for the quiz and for the certification. If you signed up through the Career Center, which I'm sure most of you did, if not all, this is how you were able to even get into the Zoom call. So, yay. To take the test, you're going to have to go back into the Career Center, into the Learning Center. Keep in mind that this test will be open book. It will have all the course materials and the slides. There's not going to be a time limit. It'll be a 25 multiple choice question test, and then you have an 80% or more passing rate or passing score. And then you do have the opportunity to retake it. And just to remind you guys that with the USGBC Learning Center account, you can access these course materials and these resources, as well as get continuing education credit details if they're available. You can see your dashboard and track how you've been progressing, as well as take your exams and earn those steps to get your certificate of completion. Is there any questions regarding the quiz, regarding the test, the certification, or regarding even the Career and Learning Center at all?
I've also put my email in the chat too, if you have any questions later on.
Is the link to the attendee completion form shared in the chat? Because I think I joined a little late. Or
Did you sign on through the Learning Center?
I marked everyone present, so everyone's
Okay.
for.
Alrighty, well, thank you everyone for joining us for this class. I think now it's our sponsors and all that need to get thanked.
SoCal Gas and so forth.
Yeah, thank you to SoCal Gas for sponsoring this course, and thank you all for attending. I really appreciate you guys taking the time and sitting through this.
Yeah, and there's definitely some classes that are happening the next couple of weeks on various other topics. So be sure to look out on our events page and training page calendar. So. Okay. There's no other questions. You get 15 minutes back of your day, and thanks for spending your time with us. All right. I think that's it. Thanks, Solimar. That worked out great.
All right. Thank you. Have a good one, everyone.
Yeah, thanks. That was good.
Okay.
Alrighty. Bye, guys. Have a good one.
Bye.